So we're like 3.5 hours of combined video into this by now. I think that's far enough to safely say that animated movies are pretty good. In fact, I'd say that the majority of them are. And right about now, we're transitioning from the good ones to the great ones. A tier, lit on God, no cap. The ones that I think are just straight up awesome. These aren't the ones that I love, but they're ones that I will enjoy any day of the week and have an absolutely fantastic time watching. I've been saying this for a while, but for real now, everything from here on out is a must watch. These top 34 movies are essential viewing, and this is actually the longest tier with like 18 movies, I think, taking us all the way up past the top 20 by the end. We're getting near the end now, only a few hours left. I said back in October that My Neighbor Totoro would be a movie I would like more with time, and I was absolutely right. I liked it a lot more with time. This is a film with basically no plot, and so the first time I watched it, I thought it was like sort of bland. I thought the kids were really cute, and I liked the dad character, but I was just sat there wishing we actually had more magical scenes. But now that I've had a few months to really digest the movie and what it was trying to do, I really like it. It's more like 8 months at this point, because I'm taking forever to make this, but still. I liked it before, but now I actually think it's really good. I mean, it's still not a plot-focused movie. More magical scenes certainly would not have hurt, but the dreamlike quality of this movie and the childlike sense of wonder that permeates every scene has made me almost nostalgic for it. Nostalgia after only 2 years is weird enough, but after months, that should tell you something. The setting of this movie is perfect. It's nothing complicated, just the Japanese countryside, but it's beautiful. It's a Ghibli movie, so of course it's beautiful, but it just makes it even more likely that there really are nature spirits here, and the nature spirits themselves. Totoro has a perfect design. He's just a 7-foot squishmallow, and he's absolutely adorable. It really sucks that he's only in like 2 scenes despite being in the name of the movie, because those 2 scenes are hands down the best parts of the movie. There's also this cat bus, which is so unsettling that it somehow wraps back around to also being cute, and the music makes every time they show up seem even more magical. This will be the start of me glazing Joe Hisaishi and his music in this video. The Wind Forest / The Path of the Wind is a great song. I don't know how this man can write music with emotions instead of with sounds, but that's really what it feels like. I know what you're thinking. If Totoro doesn't even show up a total of 5 times in this movie, it's all well and good if the scenes where he does are all magical and amazing, but what about the rest of the movie? Yeah, it's also pretty good. I mean, don't get me wrong, nothing happens, but the fact that these are the most realistic depictions of children in probably any movie on this list, and the fact that their dad is one of the best parents in any movie on this list, both make all of the meandering around this farm still really cute and endearing to watch. There's one scene where the kids are just running around the farmhouse and exploring, because after all, they just moved there, and if you were a kid once, which I'm assuming you were / are, you know that if you're in a new place, you explore it. That's just what you do, and it just feels so realistic that even when technically there's not much going on, it still feels like there is something going on. I think My Neighbor Totoro is just a really cute movie. Make your child watch this movie, please. Ideally in English, otherwise they probably will stop paying attention. There's a chance they won't like it, but when they grow up, the nostalgia they will feel for it will be unmatched. I promise you. Also, I think I'm gonna buy a Totoro plushie. I really have no reason not to at this point.
You're a fraud. You've just been taking credit for what other wizards have done.
Here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the most brilliant case study in how to cut out half the effort of making a movie while still having it be really good in the history of cinema. The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. The first half of this movie is literally just the first Lion King, but retold 1 generation in the future. Don't believe me? Just watch.
What did you think you were doing? You could have been killed today.
Simba, I'm very disappointed in you.
I know.
You could have been killed. You deliberately disobeyed me.
But Daddy, I didn't mean to disobey. I was just trying to be brave like you.
I'm telling you this because I love you.
I'm only brave when I have to be.
I don't want to lose you.
I thought I might lose you.
One day I won't be here, and I need you to carry on in my place.
The sun will set on my time here, and will rise with you as the new king.
You are part of the great circle of
life.
The second half deviates by not telling the exact same story, but it still relies on every single trope of, I think, all time. The premise is that there's a secret group of Scar sympathizers, and Scar's secret lover has been training this guy, Kovu, since birth to be the next Scar and take back the Pride Lands. Tell me if this sounds familiar. The plan that's been in the works for the last 10 years or whatever is about to happen, and Kovu is ready to fulfill his role in it. All he has to do is get close to Simba's daughter Kiara and save her life in a staged incident. The incident may involve a stampede of horned animals like that one other movie, who's to say, to win the trust of the Pride, at which point he can kill Simba. But there's a problem. You'll never guess what it is. He falls in love with her. What? She teaches him how to have fun for the first time. He even says so himself.
Fun?
But then the liar gets revealed, and he has to stand up to his family and stop them from hurting the people he now cares about. And like, with all due respect, that is the most generic plot I have ever heard, so it sounds like this movie would suck, except I actually like it a lot. The Lion King 2 is a really great movie, and that's pretty crazy and kind of impressive. So how did this even happen? Well, even though Disney put in no effort on making an original story, they still put in effort where it mattered to make all of these tropes and cliches fit into the story to the best of their ability. Kovu, it turns out, is a really good character. He may not be the most original or at all original, but he's still written well, and by the end, we actually really care about him and sympathize with him. Just like I did back when I originally reviewed this, I want to show you this clip where Kiara is showing Kovu the stars and explaining to him that those are the great kings of the past.
Do you think Scar's up there?
They didn't have to put this in there, but they did, and it makes the movie so much better, and dare I say, nuanced. Plus, Kiara is a surprisingly good character too, and their romance gets developed shockingly well. It's like, not bad, and the animation is somehow fantastic, like on the same level as the original movie. The grasslands can be cheaped out on very easily because there's nothing here, it is just grass, but instead, there's probably more detail here than in the original movie. And they changed something in the eyes too, and it makes all of the characters a lot more expressive. For the most part, the songs are only just okay, but the one Kiara and Simba sing at the beginning that keeps popping up as a leitmotif throughout the movie is really catchy, and I still actually remember it almost a year on. Considering how bad you would think this movie is, it's really surprising how much it gets right by doing so little. I honestly feel like this film could be analyzed endlessly because the way it manages to take the most bland sounding story idea probably possible and turns it into something really engaging to watch is a lesson that pretty much anyone who wants to be a screenwriter should probably learn. And it's not even the best Disney sequel out of the 6 from the 1900s.
Oh, you trying to just break me down in the driveway? Why you want to break your father down like that?
So, I didn't have much to say on Grave of the Fireflies originally, and I still don't now. This is one of those movies where you will watch it precisely once and no more. It is one of the most devastating movies ever made, and certainly the best piece of anti-war media I've ever seen, and it speaks for itself incredibly well. Truth be told, there's really nothing to say about this movie. It is devastating. It is heartbreaking. And no matter how many times I say that, it will just not matter. And you're kind of just gonna have to watch it for yourself. Seda trying so hard to make Setsuko happy at the cost of his own physical and mental health is really hard to watch. This movie is not afraid to be horrifyingly real. It's dark and it's depressing, but that makes the small moments of levity feel even more valuable. That's why despite all of the destruction and death all around them, the animation is still bright and beautiful a lot of the time. That's how Seda wants his sister to see things. It doesn't always work though, and a lot of the time, that's what hurts Seda the most. Seeing him break down in tears because he realizes that Setsuko knows their mom is dead and he wasn't able to keep it from her is such a horrible thing to put in a movie. But that's the point of the movie. And yes, the end is one of the saddest things in straight up just any film ever made. No spoilers here, because as someone who knew how the movie ended before I watched it and probably didn't get affected as much because of it, I know firsthand how important it is that you watch this movie not knowing how it concludes, although you can probably guess. The fact that this film made a random tin of fruit drops instantly recognizable to people halfway across the world from where they're sold in real life should tell you all you need to know. Grave of the Fireflies is a really simple movie, but that's the beauty of it. It doesn't overcomplicate its story. It's just pure, condensed, concentrated sadness, because that's what war is. That is the message of the movie, and it is not trying to hide that from you. Definitely watch it sometime, but just be prepared to be very sad.
The opera, it's tomorrow night.
What a masterpiece. Not only is Make Mine Music the best wartime era movie, but it's also better than all of the Golden Age movies and better than all but 3 Silver Age movies. It really shows how Disney was able to make the best of a bad situation, taking the idea of a package film composed only of shorts and using that idea to make one of the greatest things of all time. Not really. It's not all good. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Ranking time. Number 10, Without You. If you make a short with some cool abstract visuals, I'll probably like it more than a 5-minute sequence of just normal things, like trees, for example. But if you make a short with some abstract visuals, or even just unrelated visuals, that make me have literally no idea what I just watched, I'll probably end up not wanting to watch it again. And that's what Without You is. I'd explain what it is, except I can't. I guess the music is fine. The comment under the YouTube video that says I haven't heard this song in 75 years made me feel pretty guilty for putting this last, I'm not gonna lie. But I don't really get how these random visuals relate to anything. Number 9, 2 silhouettes. Everything I just said about the last one also applies here. It's just 2 silhouettes falling in love. Not in a cool way, just in a, oh look, it's the outlines of 2 people dancing way. Whose idea was this? Number 8, Blue Bayou. It's just a forest scene at nighttime. A heron shows up for a while, and some guy is singing opera in the background, and that's it. It's only about 4 minutes, but it still doesn't really do anything that makes me remember it, and I totally get why it was cut from Fantasia. Number 7, Peter and the Wolf. Probably the worst of all the ones that tell an actual story just because of its length, but there's still a lot of cool things in this one. Mainly, I like how every animal is represented by a different leitmotif played on a different instrument, and I was surprised how nostalgic I suddenly felt when this started playing. Who wrote this song? Oh, that makes sense. Plus, the general story is also pretty okay. I like all of the character designs, and the wolf is actually seriously menacing. It's not like this is bad or anything, it's just that all of the others are better. So there were only, what, like 3 bad ones? That's pretty good. Also, we see the duck die. It's not hinted at or anything. We watch it walk through the gates of heaven. That is as dead as you can be. How is it now fine? What happened? Number 6, The Martins and the Coys. This one is about 2 rival factions on nearby hilltops that are always trying to kill each other. What I like about this one is that they actually do. Everybody dies. And this also might be the reason for the whole movie not being on Disney+. Well, not also. It is definitely the reason. I mean, to be fair, I would definitely say that this counts as comic gunplay. It is. But to that, I say that you have Dumbo and Peter Pan on Disney Plus just fine, which represent much darker and more malicious parts of the company's history. Therefore, I expect to see this brought to streaming services within the year. There's also a thing with a boy from one faction and a girl from another falling in love because of course they do, and that's okay, I guess, but it's made way better by the fact that it ends in divorce, with all of their ancestors laughing hysterically at them from heaven, causing the cycle to start all over again. I think the backgrounds are really pretty in this one, and I like the song they play, and I was a big fan of the comic gunplay. Number 5. Casey at the Bat. It just shows a baseball game where everyone shows up just to see this one baseball player. It has your average cartoon baseball antics, and I like them, and I think they're entertaining, but none of that actually matters. Casey is the only thing that matters. Look at this majestic lad, my sweet summer prince. Everything that this god come down to earth does is executed with the beauty and delicacy of an angel. Nothing else in this short even matters, because it all pales, do you hear me? Pales in comparison to the magnificence of this broad-chested sculpture of a human being. Number 4, Johnny Fedora and Alice Bluebonnet. Yeah, that's right. That's not getting any clarification at all. Johnny Fedora and Alice Bluebonnet. This is one of the weirder shorts in Disney's collection. It's just the love story of 2 hats. Yeah, 2 hats, and somehow it's actually not that bad, which is even crazier. Watching this hat try to find the love of his life was actually kind of cute, and I like how at the end, when he's given up all hope, he just looks over, and by pure coincidence, she's just there. I got about as invested as you can realistically hope, considering that it's a love story between hats, and except for the kind of iffy part with the homeless black guy who stole the hat and immediately got into a gunfight at a bar, which I'm sure had no underlying message whatsoever, I had basically no big issues, other than the main idea of a love story between 2 hats, which I'm not sure if I mentioned, is stupid. I like the city, it looks really nice. I don't know, that's it. Number 3, After You've Gone. Wow, abstract visuals that actually make sense and add to the overall package. Is it my birthday? No, it's not. Music itself is nothing special, but the dancing instruments are really creative and make this short seriously pretty good. It's definitely abstract, like things are morphing into other things, you know how it is, but it's all under a single theme of instruments, and they do so many genuinely unique things with it. It just serves as something nice to look at in between the other shorts. One of my favorite abstract things from Disney, right along with Bumble Boogie, which now that I think about it, is basically the exact same thing as this, but just a little bit better. Number 2, All the Cats Join In. This one is just about a bunch of kids getting together for a party and dancing, basically, but it's still actually really cool and really infectiously fun. The style feels super unique. Everything takes place in a sketchbook and is being drawn in as the short is happening. I always like when these shorts do this. It's just a cool effect, and it really never gets old, and it gives this one a bit of identity, especially because it's probably used better here than it is anywhere else. There is a certain part that I guarantee has been replayed and paused significantly more than anything else in any Disney movie, but for the most part, this is the most hip-hop, bebop, dance till you drop thing in Walt Disney history. And number 1, The Whale Who Wanted to Sing at the Met. It was the best 2 years ago, and it's the best now. This opera singing whale is one of those things that everyone knows about, although most people don't know where he's from. Well, this is where he's from. Not only is the whale super charming, but the idea is just so ridiculous that it's impossible to not have a fun time watching this. And as the opera shows go on, the idea just becomes more and more brilliant. But what really cements this short as a masterpiece is the end. Spoiler, I guess, even though this is like 80 years old, but he gets harpooned and dies. And even though it tries to end on a happy note by showing him singing opera in heaven as this angel whale, it still just feels really melancholy and just very bittersweet. This is one of the only shorts Disney ever made that has an honest-to-goodness theme, this one being that sometimes people just can't handle a miracle, which is probably why it got so famous, and deservedly so. This is right up there with The Sorcerer's Apprentice for sheer perfection. 10 out of 10 art, belongs in a museum, unironically one of humanity's proudest cultural achievements, something everyone should watch at least once. And it looks like I didn't write any transition to exit out of this segment, so I guess we're ending the segment right. What would you say if I told you that Rankin and Bass, the guys from all those old Christmas movies, made an animated feature film in the 1980s? What would you say if I then told you that it's one of the most otherworldly things I've ever seen in my entire life? The Last Unicorn is one of the weirdest and most unique movies that I think has ever been made. It's one of the best and worst things I've ever watched, and also both and also neither. All of the charming and magical old Disney movies look absolutely pathetic in comparison to this movie. This is probably the most magical and ethereal and charming and investing thing I've ever experienced, and that is genuinely the only word for it. It is an experience. I'm sure you've heard of the phrase nostalgic time bomb before, and let me tell you, of all the things I watched for the first time for this series, The Last Unicorn is by far the thing I'm most nostalgic for, and anyone who's ever watched this movie can probably tell you the same thing. It doesn't even feel like a movie. It's so hard to describe just what the hell this is. And I know if I sat here for 10 hours talking about it, I still wouldn't be any closer. But what I do know is that literally every element of this movie just adds to the dreamlike storybook quality that makes watching this feel like you're reliving a past life. I'm not even kidding. The backgrounds are gorgeous. All of the settings we see throughout the movie feel distinct, as do all of the things in those settings. The character designs are all perfect, even this one lady who looks like she got her chin caught in a textile mill. They all have these thick outlines around them, which typically I'm not a fan of, but here it just adds to the style and makes things even more like you're watching an epic tale from some weird ethereal land. And of course, the epic tale itself contributes heavily too. Every character we meet along the way, every new conflict, every new plot development is just so creative. It feels like the weird stuff that you could only come up with in your dreams. The king made a Red Bull, what? Chase all of the unicorns into the sea because he liked looking at them. It's the waves. That's how we have waves. What a crazy creative idea. And that's why the last unicorn is the last. But then part of the way through the movie, she gets turned into a human and starts having emotions for the first time. Yes, you heard that right. So now she's on this quest to stop the one thing she's afraid of while she's being overwhelmed by feelings, which is something she's never had before. You can't tell me Arthur Rankin Jr. or Jules Bass didn't have a dream about the entire plot to this movie, quickly wrote it down before they forgot it, and based an entire film off of it. Because that's sure what it feels like. Especially because every voice actor is someone I know, so it feels like every voice was just picked out of my own brain. This old hag is Mrs. Potts. The prince is Jeff Bridges. Schmendrick is a younger Alan Arkin, which is so uncanny to hear because I can't even picture what Alan Arkin looked like when he was younger. All of these dreamlike things make this movie just so unique. But the thing I'm by far the most nostalgic for is the music. The main theme for this movie was written by, I'll let you guess, it was written by America, and it's one of the most beautiful things ever composed. I'm not kidding, and it's not even the only great song in the movie. I could say the exact same thing about Mayans Road, too. I listen to these songs all the time. They're probably in the background right now as some sort of instrumental that's royalty-free. The soundtrack to this movie is just the most delicious icing you'll ever taste on what was already the weirdest cake ever baked. The Last Unicorn is not a perfect movie. The pacing falters quite a few times. I think they spend a bit too much time just walking around the king's castle, and this butterfly makes me want to kill myself. And my eyes did kind of glaze over when I was watching it and realized there were still 20 minutes left. There's a reason it's not at the top of the list, but at the same time, this movie's placement on the list literally does not matter. Same with everything else Rankin and Bass made, because it's barely even a movie, and I mean that in the best way possible. Everyone should watch this at least once so that they can come back to it later. Coming back to this movie just a year and a half after I watched it the first time and feeling like I've known it my whole life is one of the weirdest and most uncanny experiences I've ever had. And things like that can't really be compared to 91 other things that are honestly nothing like it at all. It's just The Last Unicorn. That might not seem like a lot, but trust me, it is. Oh yeah, and during the credits I noticed a lot of Japanese names, so I looked it up and found out that this movie was animated by Topcraft, which would later splinter into multiple companies, one of which is Studio Ghibli. That might be the single most insane piece of deep animation lore of all time.
I thought you were dead.
Greatly exaggerated.
Based on everything you know about Pocahontas, you would probably imagine that a sequel movie would be absolutely intolerable and just an overall miserable experience. But not only is Pocahontas 2 Journey to a New World not that at all, it's also an unironically great movie that has not decreased in quality for me at all over the last year or so. At first, I kinda assumed I would like it a bit less after the shock of a good Pocahontas movie wore off, but that hasn't happened. I still think it's just as surprisingly fantastic as before. And do you know how they accomplished this feat? They ditched everything from the first movie. Mainly the two things that were really not working, the racism and John Smith, which are kind of intertwined. The whole idea behind this movie is that this guy, John Rolfe, visits America as a diplomat, but her dad really does not want to go to England, so Pocahontas goes in his stead to try to bring peace to the two nations. Things don't exactly work the greatest, and then Ratcliffe shows up again, and the movie's just about that. There's still plenty of racism in this movie, but not in a malicious and stupid way like in the first movie, actually in a very blunt way. Pretty much everyone in England is just flat out racist, but that's because they were in real life. Here, it actually works toward a theme where those characters are obviously wrong. The same thing happens with John Rolfe, who has essentially replaced John Smith because everyone thinks he's dead. He starts the movie as kind of pompous, but not in an annoying or arrogant way. He's surprised that Pocahontas volunteers to go to England because she's a woman, stuff like that, but it's portrayed as obviously wrong. Let me repeat, all of his flaws are portrayed as obvious flaws in his character that he then slowly overcomes as he gets to know Pocahontas better. And let me tell you, you, as a result, he acts as a much better love interest than the other John. He's really a good person, and you can tell that by the end, he really does care about Pocahontas and the fate of her tribe. Watching him and this delightful old woman who likes tea try to educate Pocahontas about English things to appeal to the king is sort of the point of the movie, and John Rolfe makes it really entertaining to watch. I thought they were gonna set up some sort of stupid liar revealed trope, but they don't even mention it. And then when John Smith comes back, instead of the movie indulging in stupid cliche conflict between the Johns, they end up getting along really well, and they become like best buds. And then when Pocahontas chooses John Rolfe at the end of the movie, John Smith just tells her that he completely understands, wishes her the best, and leaves the movie. What? The way this movie handles all of these topics is 100 times more mature and smart than the way the last movie handled them, which is ironic, since the last movie was written to be a deep and mature story so that it would win an Oscar. Meanwhile, Ratcliffe is back and he's better than ever. As the main antagonist, it makes sense that he's the most racist one, but instead of the movie portraying that racism as exclusive to him because he's just a bad person, whereas everyone else is innocent, here, he's just convincing people who already share his beliefs that Pocahontas can't be trusted. And the animation, again, the animation is absolutely phenomenal. John Rolfe's house is so detailed, and it makes the whole thing feel so warm and cozy, and the streets of London look really great. I can't stress enough how great the streets of London look. The song that plays when Pocahontas arrives in London is basically just the Englishmen introducing us to their city, and it's one of the most inviting and good songs on this whole list. It's called like London Town probably or something. It's on YouTube, I'm sure, and you should watch it now. It's actually like one of the I don't know, there's just something about it. Journey to a New World really was the most apt name for this movie. It's basically saying, that movie took place over there. We're not doing that anymore. We're over here now, and our movie is gonna be like this. And then they went and made a sequel that fixes every problem the original had, and improves on everything else too while it's at it. The characters are likable now. The movie's fun to watch now. The themes aren't horrible and actually make sense now. The pacing's great now. The soundtrack's great now. The animation's great now. The movie's just great now. This is such a fun movie to watch, and hands down, the best Disney sequel from the 20th century. You definitely don't need to watch Pocahontas 1 to understand this movie, and you definitely don't want to watch Pocahontas 1 if you like movies that aren't insulting and horrible. I am a certified Pocahontas 2 fan, and I will defend His Excellency John Rolfe until the end of time.
Solomon, give me the child!
I don't get it. The Bronze Age movies I used to like, I now don't, and the ones I didn't like, I now do. But I'm not gonna complain because I'm really glad I came around on The Rescuers. I still definitely see all of the issues that made me not like this movie initially, but I also now see all of the great stuff that makes me sort of not care anymore. Disney cooked with these Bronze Age mouse movies, let me tell you. So I originally, like I said, didn't really like this movie. I like the idea of a world-spanning network of mice that rescues kidnapped children, but the child kidnapper in question and her reason for kidnapping the child, and also her choice of hostage location, kinda ruined things a bit for me. To be fair, Medusa is kinda still a nothing character, and her only trait is pure greed. Not in an interesting way like other Disney villains, more like in a budget Cruella de Vil way, and there's a reason for that. That reason being, she quite literally is. This was originally gonna be a 101 Dalmatians sequel, and Cruella was meant to be the villain, but then Disney said, wait, we don't like sequels though, which is very interesting considering they then proceeded to make a sequel to this very movie, and then they changed their minds entirely and made sequels to everything else too. So their only excuse for why this movie has such a weak villain is now completely null and void. Also, Moana 2, this is gonna be my only chance to mention this. Moana 2? Are you kidding me right now? Also, Medusa kidnapped this child so she could send her down a small little hole to go retrieve this big-ass diamond. Except why in God's green swamp would you need a child to go down there? Is it really easier to abduct an orphan and drag her across the planet than it is to just dig the hole slightly larger, or even just get like a dog to do it or something? Also, they kidnapped her before they even found where it was, so how did they even know she'd be useful at all? The only thing they say in the movie is she's the only one small enough to squeeze down the hole, and that's definitely just not true. For all of these reasons, the last time I watched this movie, I did not like it, but somehow none of that matters to me anymore. Sure, Medusa doesn't really have any defining traits still, but I don't really think she needs to, and everything surrounding her and the conflict that she created is still pretty good. I like Bianca and Bernard, and I think their romance is really cute, and I like the Jim Jordan albatross, and I think a lot of the scuffles they get into on their quest to save this girl are pretty entertaining. Plus, I actually like Penny as a character, and I appreciate how she's slightly more than just a plot device and makes multiple attempts to escape throughout the movie. Also, we once again see how a teddy bear instantly makes us like the character who owns it. It works every single time, and that prayer scene actually almost made me cry this time, which is weird, and she really looks like a girl version of the kid from the Iron Giant. It's actually kind of uncanny. The pacing is pretty good too, which is not how I remember it, and I found myself wanting to go back and watch it again the very next day, a sentiment I definitely didn't have back in 2022. The only thing that I still don't love about this movie is the animation. So much of this movie takes place in this absolutely dismal swamp. It's got to be one of the worst settings of any Disney movie. It'd probably look nicer if it maintained the really pretty canvas art style from the opening credits, which goes so hard by the way, but that's not what happened, and it really sucks because the stuff not in this swamp looks pretty good. The Rescue Aid Society has some cool details and feels really cozy. Wait, why does Africa only have one delegate? And the orphanage and even just the city streets just fit with the vibe of the movie. None of this stuff looks even remotely Xeroxy, and I'd say that most of the character designs are pretty good, but like, this swamp is really not great, but that's only one issue, and pretty much everything else I've completely turned around on. I like this movie now. I think it's pretty good. We may not have gotten 101 Dalmatians 2, but we did get The Rescuers 1, and you know what? I'll take that any day of the week. Cinderella was one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to make this video. I ranked it so high originally. There's no way it was actually that good. This was like the one old movie that I knew would be lowered. I just needed to watch it to figure out how much. And then I watched it again and realized that no, it's actually just as good as I said it was the first time. I know this is a pretty divisive movie with a lot of people really enjoying it and a lot of people slowly realizing that, wait, this movie is just an hour of mouse shenanigans, and then they slowly lose their minds and end up hating it, and that's fair, I guess. But you know what? I just see it as doing what Snow White did. Cartoon goofiness that doesn't really have any bearing on the plot, but is still enjoyable to watch nonetheless. And yes, it really does have a lot of the same ideas. There's still plenty of magic, there's still a princess obviously, and said princess can talk to animals and remains kind and pure even when she realistically shouldn't. There's still a prince who acts more as a plot device than an actual person because he's really not that important story-wise and just acts as a representation of escape from the princess's current life of servitude. There are still lots of visual gags and jokes. The antagonists are still all unredeemable evil people. The list goes on and on. Cinderella just continues doing what Snow White did, which makes sense since they both had the goal of, oh yeah, Disney has what it takes to make this movie, and paired with a stronger story, with a lot of tension once the plot gets started, might I add, we're actually left with a movie even better than Snow White. Cinderella is actually a decent protagonist. If anyone was looking for a version of Snow White that maintains her innocence and kindness, but doesn't act like a jellyfish and float in the breeze wherever she's told to, hello, she's right here. Yeah, she does fall in love with the guy after dancing with him for 20 minutes, but he falls in love with her back. They're both equally dumb in this regard, and there are plenty of other more sexist things from this time to get mad about.
Girls talk too much.
Yes, girls talk to...
And beyond this one thing, she's actually not that much of a doormat. She obeys her stepmother, but you can hear the vitriol in her voice every time she says yes to some command. She's not the best Disney protagonist, but we've definitely had worse. And speaking of Tremaine and the stepsisters, they're all such great villains, some of the best and most memorable in Disney history. Everyone knows about wicked stepmothers. It's a thing in our society that just is, like Darth Vader being Luke's father, or the old Christmas movies, which is an analogy that I cannot stop using in this video, but whatever. You have to be on another level of iconic to perpetuate something like that to that degree. And honestly, the same thing can be said for the whole movie. Everyone knows the story of Cinderella after all, and most Cinderella stories aren't 75 years old. Tremaine is straight up evil, and the stepsisters are obnoxious but in a funny way. I like that they make a point to show how inept at absolutely everything the two stepsisters are. It just makes it even easier for the audience to see how unfair Cinderella is being treated and really hate this woman. Plus, it makes it so much fun anytime they're on screen. And also, the animation is like amazing, so much better than the Golden Age movies. The sets are huge. Like, imagine the logistics of making any of the scenes with all of these stairs. Just think of all of the stuff you'd have to do to draw that. There are some effects like the fairy godmother's wand and these bubbles in this one song that hold up really well, and the character designs are great too. Cinderella's is probably the worst just because she looks like the most average white woman I've ever seen, but even then, her design isn't bad, just nothing special, and the gown is so iconic anyway that it doesn't even matter. Plus, every single object in the movie has so much detail, and since this time around I knew exactly what was coming, I made sure to enjoy it. And the songs are really great too, probably also better than most of the Golden Age movies. They're the ones that everyone knows, but there are just as many that people just don't talk about enough. Every single one is great, and I just wish there were more. I even like the one that the mice sing, although I totally get if that statement is simply too much for you and you slam your computer shut immediately. To be fair, my biggest complaint with the movie is the sheer amount of mouse antics we get in this movie. I don't have a problem with cartoon hijinks, and I usually like them, but I also like to have some sort of balance. One of the things I really appreciated about Snow White was that balance between actual character and plot moments and more cartoony moments. Obviously, there should be some, since that's kind of what Disney was and still is kind of known for, especially so back when Snow White came out, and I'm really glad we still have that classic distributed by RKO Radio Pictures energy in this movie. It just wouldn't have that nostalgic charm to it otherwise. I really love the visual comedy in this movie. I like the fact that the King and the Duke are just goofballs instead of random boring people. All of the little jokes here and there give the movie so much more personality. But there's definitely a lot of it. I like pretty much every scene with the mice on its own, but when you put them one after the other, it does get a bit annoying, and by the end it's kind of like, really, we have to make the mice dragging the key up the stairs into this whole thing? I really like this movie in its current state, but considering how phenomenal things get when the plot actually starts happening, it definitely seems probable that it would be an overall better movie if the first half actually had Cinderella in it instead of just a bunch of mice on a quest to make Cinderella a dress. I like every single scene with the mice a lot, like I said, and if this was like 3 or 4 10-minute shorts and Jack and Gus were replaced by Mickey and Minnie, they would be absolutely peak, I'm sure. But I just feel like some of this space could have been used for something other than this in this situation. But I still stand by Cinderella. The pacing really is not that bad. In fact, it's really great. People say a lot that things only get going at the very end, but that's not the case at all. By the halfway point, granted that includes credits, Cinderella is already getting into the carriage. All of that great classic stuff that people say we barely get to see has like half an hour all to itself, and it's not like nothing happens in the first part either. What I'm getting at here is that my biggest issue with the movie is way less of an issue than I thought it would be, just like with Snow White. This ended up just being a full review, it turns out, also just like Snow White, but like, this movie deserves it. Cinderella knew what it was trying to do and nailed it. Great start to the Silver Age, but a Cinderella story is still 50 times better. Oh, and I can't believe I forgot about the best line in any Disney movie, with some of the best subliminal messaging I've ever seen.
And I can do the sewing. Leave the sewing to the women.
Modern Disney wishes they could take this back, but guess what? They never can.
10 minutes into the game and the game is already trying to make me sad.
The Disney Bronze Age was overall probably not great for the studio, but that makes it even weirder that right in the middle, in a row, we got 3 of the best Disney movies ever. One of them was The Great Mouse Detective, one of them was The Rescuers, and in between them was The Fox and the Hound. What a phenomenal movie. It's so good that I almost feel like I don't even have to say anything more. I could easily just tell you that you need to watch this movie and go on my way, and everyone who's ever watched it would say, no, he's right, but obviously I'm not going to do that. The idea of 2 people who are supposed to hate each other becoming friends isn't exactly an original idea. In fact, it might be the least original idea of all time, but the way it's executed sets this one apart. Normally the story is about proving society wrong and teaching everyone not to be so hateful, but this movie kinda isn't that. Society doesn't get taught anything here. It does the teaching. After watching Copper and Todd go on a bunch of cute little escapades as kids, we're forced to watch them slowly grow further and further apart. And by the end of the movie, they hate each other, or at least Copper hates Todd. Even once Todd goes away to live in the forest, Copper and the Hunter are both so blinded by their prejudice that they go out of their way to make sure he dies anyway. If that's not a metaphor for something, I don't know what is. Also, as soon as Todd enters the forest, a bunch of the animals basically tell him to go back to his country, which I feel like I don't even need to go into any more than I just did. Of course, they had to end it happily. Some people say that this undercuts the message. But I disagree. In fact, I think the scene where the hunter really sees the sort of friendship between the two main characters for the first time and just can't make himself shoot Todd is one of the best scenes in the movie with some really great animation. It's a pretty nice and fitting way to cap off the movie's themes, and it's not like those themes were completely ruined by them not both dying at the end. That's ridiculous. Seeing these two friends get reunited after so long, only for everything to fail so quickly and so horribly, is genuinely one of the saddest and most surprisingly powerful plots to any Disney movie. It would have been sadder if Disney actually had the guts to kill off this one dog, but it's still sad enough anyway.
You're my very best friend. And you're mine too, Todd. And we'll always be friends forever, won't we? Yeah, forever.
I love dramatic irony, don't you? Honestly, this whole movie is a testament to the power of dramatic irony, and that's not even including this absolutely heartbreaking scene where Todd's owner returns him to the woods, which is not only another good example of dramatic irony, but is also another good example of something that's sad as hell. We know what's happening, the old lady obviously knows what's happening, and she's silently crying the whole time about it, and we're also silently crying the whole time about it, but Todd doesn't realize, and that's what makes the whole thing 1,000 times sadder. Plus, the forest and just the animation in general is great. I feel like this marks the real turning point of when Disney was able to fully make Xerox work to its truest potential, and I say that because the movie just looks fantastic. I think they finally realized, hey, maybe cheaping out on the backgrounds isn't working out. Obviously, Xerox movies before this had nice backgrounds too, but I don't think they were on this level. You almost can't tell it's Xerox at all, and for me, there's no bigger compliment than that. I guess there are some filler parts here and there, like I could have done without watching Todd try to hook up with some lady fox whose name I do not know, and any time spent on these two birds is a complete waste, no matter how much I like the caterpillar guy. But you know what? It basically doesn't matter. This is still by far one of the saddest Disney movies, and probably also one of the saddest on this whole list. Others have their sad moments for sure, but when it comes to making a movie that, when you think back to it, makes you just feel sad before any other emotion, I can't really think of another that compares to this, like Bambi, I guess, but come on, let's be serious here. The Fox and the Hound is just a great movie, and a way better commentary on racism and prejudice than anything modern Disney could possibly put out, and the whole world knows it.
Grandma, it's me, Anastasia.
Anastasia is the Disney Renaissance movie that never was. I'm so glad that Don Bluth was able to get one more win before he faded away, and what a win it is. There's a reason that so many people think that this straight up is a Disney movie, and that reason is that it's awesome. There aren't even that many films actually from the Renaissance that I enjoy as thoroughly as this. A lot of them are ranked higher anyway because they don't have Rasputin, which we'll get to, but he doesn't change the fact that there are honestly very few films in existence that have as much sauce as this one does. The story had a lot of potential to be really dumb. The Duchess Anastasia doesn't remember that she's the Duchess Anastasia and pretends to be the Duchess Anastasia even though she actually is the Duchess Anastasia. That sounds kind of ridiculous, but it isn't at all. So basically she gets involved with these guys, Dimitri and Vlad, who have heard news that Anastasia's grandma is offering a big reward for anyone who can return her granddaughter to her. They have a plan to find a girl who isn't actually the real Duchess Anastasia and make her seem like the real Duchess Anastasia to get the reward. But things get interesting when the girl they pick actually is the Duchess Anastasia. I don't care what you say, that is cool, and it adds tons of dramatic irony and tension to the story. Anastasia doesn't realize they're sort of lying to her. The guys don't realize she's actually the real thing. She also doesn't realize she's actually the real thing. There's just multiple layers here, and it's really interesting to watch unfold over the course of the movie, especially because all of these characters are also goddamn likable. Anya is a really charming protagonist, and they do such a good job making us sympathize with her wanting to find out where she came from. Obviously, the tension doesn't come from us also wanting to find out, since we already know, we start the movie knowing, but here, they use the fact that we already know to make us root for her to figure it out even more. But just as strong, if not stronger than Anya, is Dimitri. One of the best love interests in any movie I've ever seen. He has such fantastic chemistry with Anya, and on top of Vlad being the greatest side character in cinematic history, it makes the whole middle chunk of the movie where their plan gets set in motion so fun to watch. In case you forgot or haven't seen the movie, Dimitri used to work at the palace as a boy, and he was the one who led the royal family family out through a secret passageway, but in one of the most brilliant uses of a small detail coming back later in the movie I've ever seen, we get this one thing toward the end where Anastasia is talking to her grandma and telling her a story about the night they fled the palace to convince her she's the real thing. Of course, Dimitri was there, and as she tells the story, we get this amazing shot where you can see Dimitri slowly realize that this girl who he picked out by complete chance to be the fake Anastasia is actually the real Anastasia. I absolutely love the show don't tell here. We don't need to be told what's happening. We can see it, and it makes one of the best scenes in the movie, except all the other scenes with the grandma, which are also great, and the songs, which are straight up godlike. You want to know why we sympathize with all the characters so much? Why we're able to get so invested in these people, and why we're able to have so much fun watching their plan come together? It's because every single song in this movie is amazing. 3 in particular: Journey to the Past, Once Upon a December, and Learn to Do It. All 3 are legitimately perfect, and they would not be out of place among the ranks of Be Our Guest, Hakuna Matata, A Whole New World, Hellfire, Under the Sea. The visuals are striking, the melodies are perfect, they're all on my playlist. They all glue our eyes to the screen and put us in the movie, making us feel like we're there, feeling the characters' emotions right alongside of them. The final shot of Journey to the Past with all of St. Petersburg spread out below her. The part in Once Upon a December where the ghosts from Anastasia's past come down from the stained glass windows and dance, giving new life to things that she knows feel familiar but she just can't reach. All of Learn to Do It, which I honestly probably like more than both of the other two because of how infectiously catchy it is the whole way through. The way the characters take turns singing, some really smart and funny lyrics. This part...
And I recall his yellow cat.
I don't believe we told her that.
Which is just a really smart and good lyric, I guess. And the animation is beautiful. Every street has so much detail. All of the interiors look fantastic. This feels like a real place, which is really good because it is a real place. Except for a few odd bits of dated CGI, the movie looks and feels incredibly timeless. How is this movie not an S tier? It's this guy. Sorry, but I'm really not a big Rasputin fan. I really don't think he fits with the tone of the movie, not to mention the fact that this is a way bigger departure from history than anything the rest of the movie does, and I really don't think it works. And to make matters worse, he probably could have just been removed entirely, and the only thing that would change is that we would lose all of these scenes with him in this bat, which only just break up the pacing anyway. And I guess we'd lose this rock ballad song, which I honestly forgot about until just now, so yeah, that's not a real loss either. I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, but I really do think the movie would be better without this guy. The plot still has forward momentum without him since he only ever works from the shadows. Anya doesn't have to magic sleepwalk off the boat. The same thing can be accomplished by heavy weather. You can even have the train just derail from a freak accident if you want. It doesn't matter. And the sort of dumb climax can kind of just be removed entirely since her being reunited with her grandma was what everything was building toward anyway. I just can't for the life of me think of any reason why I would want this boring villain to stay in the movie, and it really sucks that he's here dragging down the pacing in some spots. But honestly, it's fine. The movie still made the top 25 for a reason. Anastasia is an absolute masterpiece of a film, and it's one that everybody should watch at some point. It's exciting, it's funny, it's majestic, it's emotional, it's incredibly enjoyable, and most of all, it's inspired. Good job, Don Bluth. Not my absolute favorite of your movies, but still an 8 or 9 out of 10 regardless.
Are you leaving because I'm a woman? Or is it because I'm too young?
Actually, it's both, kiddo.
There's only one movie like Porco Rosso, and that movie is Porco Rosso. Studio Ghibli had never made a movie like this, and they've never made one since, and nobody else has ever made one either. The vibe of this film is absolutely impeccable, and I 100% get why this is one of some people's absolute favorite Ghibli movies. The fact that I have it this high, and I'm still not even sure if I'm one of those people, should tell you just how consistently amazing this studio is. It should also tell you how good this movie is, when I say that this is sort of a war movie, and I still actually think it's good, because I hate war movies, but maybe that's just because it's so much more than just a war movie. It's also kind of like a spy thriller and a deep retrospective story about a guy who thinks he isn't worth saving, becoming inspired by the people around him and slowly learning to love himself again. Yeah, there's a lot to this movie. That's probably why people like it. Porco is such an amazing protagonist, voiced in the dub to perfection by Michael Keaton. His design is clearly a pig, but he still looks just on the edge of being human, human, which is really fitting for his character, because that's basically what he is. He's quiet and stoic, but that makes the rare scenes where he opens up all the more impactful. Slowly learning more about him and his backstory over the course of the movie, slowly growing to like him, becoming more and more certain that he is worth saving, and that he is a good person deep down, and we're just really rooting for him to realize it for himself. Oh, this movie's so good! And Theo is insanely likable too. The huge contrast between them makes so many of their discussions way more interesting, and it makes it all the more satisfying to see them become better and better friends. I'll admit that the main villains in this movie aren't my favorite. I like this guy from Texas, but he's really not as memorable to me as, like, any other Ghibli character, and I like the pirates who serve as good comic relief, but they're also nothing special, and Porco's love interest, whose name I'm now realizing I've entirely forgotten, isn't exactly my favorite character either, but that's fine, because they don't really have to be. So much of this movie is just quiet discussions between Porco and some other people in the movie, and they're all so great, with some seriously powerful lines in there. I don't care what you say, better a pig than a fascist is the most epic line in Ghibli history, but when we're not getting these scenes, we're getting these scenes. The whole part of the movie where they're rebuilding the plane sounds so abysmally boring on paper, but it's somehow unironically my favorite part of the movie. All of the characters are just allowed to shine here, and I just can't not have fun watching this. And the fights in this movie, the fights are good too. They don't do the thing where they just yell, "That's one hell of a pilot!" We are shown, bullet by bullet, that Porco is the best dog fighter in Italy. No one says, "Porco, you're the best dog fighter in Italy," and Porco goes, "I know I am." We are shown through some of the best choreographed and most gripping action scenes in any movie on this whole list that Porco Rosso is him. And the animation elevates all of this to the next level. I highly doubt all of the plane rebuilding scenes would be as fun to watch if even the most destitute warehouses weren't filled with all of these details that just catch your eye. And if the blander parts of the setting look this good, imagine how beautiful the rest looks like. The streets of Italy are gorgeous and add to the feel of the area so much, and all of this is put on display to the best of Ghibli's ability in Porco's secret hideout, which has to be one of the most aesthetically pleasing places I've ever seen, period. Yeah, I kind of like Porco Rosso. I'd say that this is one of the most thought-provoking and silently beautiful movies I've ever seen if we weren't dealing with Studio Ghibli, who does exactly that literally all the time, and sometimes even better. But even though this isn't the most thought-provoking or silently beautiful movie on this list, it's still a unique and surprisingly enchanting experience that all Ghibli enjoyers and all non-Ghibli enjoyers need to check out. The first Ghibli movie I ever saw is number 86 out of 92 on this list, so when I went into Castle in the Sky, I was expecting something about as miserable, so imagine how happy I was when I ended up watching one of the best movies I've ever seen. This is kind of the quintessential Ghibli movie, but I could definitely say that about a few others, and probably will say it about a few others. Everything that I've come to love this studio for is present in some way in this movie. The world building is incredible. No exposition gets shoved down our throats, but everything that we need to understand gets explained to us at exactly the right time. For the first 30 minutes of this movie, we barely even know what's going on. We don't know who this girl is, or why she's being chased by the government, or what these pirates are doing here, but it doesn't detract from the movie, because we're allowed to figure those things out on our own whenever they matter in the story. Ghibli is kind of the master of wordless storytelling, of showing us some shots of a place with some music in the background and no words whatsoever, and somehow doing it so well that by the end, we feel like we're there. By far the best example of this in this movie, and one of the best examples in this whole video, is when Patsu and Shida finally arrive at Laputa. After about 80 minutes of trying to get there, we get about 5 whole minutes of the two characters just silently exploring the different parts of the floating city. There are a few lines here and there, but for the most part, the audience is just allowed to sit there and admire the world that the animators have concocted. This is one of the biggest reasons why people get so invested in Ghibli movies like this. We're given so many opportunities to just be transfixed by the setting, to just look at something beautiful and listen to some Joe Hisaishi music, which is just as beautiful here as it always is, and this 5-minute sequence is by no means the only time this happens in the movie. Hell, like I said before, for a pretty good chunk of the first 30 minutes, we don't really know why this girl just floated down from the sky. It's just the two main characters talking, interspersed with a few of those wordless scenes, and by the end of the first act, we like both main characters and feel like we know this mining settlement as if we were actually there. Of course, the girl is still being chased, and so that part of the movie ends with a huge action scene where they flee the village, but it's so creative, and it's just another thing that makes the movie so entertaining from start to finish. And the pirates, yet another great example of how the audience can be made to care about characters. These people who were initially antagonists end up working with the main characters by the 1 hour mark, and there are just like 10 minutes where they're on their flying ship just existing together, and it's literally just time to learn more about the characters and get attached to them. The whole entire movie is just fun action scenes, great characters interacting, beautiful scenery, beautiful music, and also a lot of comedy. This movie is surprisingly funny. It isn't a perfect movie by any means. There are some pacing issues. The whole middle chunk of the movie where Sheeta has been kidnapped by the government is not the most interesting. The main antagonist may be voiced by Mark Hamill, but that still isn't enough for me to seriously care about him. His backstory is pretty cool, but I'm just not able to get interested in him as much as I am the other characters in the movie, and that does make the climax a bit too long for my liking. But in the grand scheme of Castle in the Sky, one of the best movies from one of the best studios on this list, it barely even matters. This is a movie that I feel like anyone can like, and it's as good of an introduction to Ghibli as you can get. Certainly better than Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, that's for damn sure. Awesome movie, 9 out of 10 probably. Check it out.
Please won't you be my neighbor,
the Yamadas.
My opinions on My Neighbors the Yamadas have not changed at all since my review of it last October, and you might as well just go check out that if you're really interested. There are absolutely zero ongoing plot threads in this movie. It's purely a collection of shorts of varying lengths, all about one family and their adventures. Not like cool adventures, just adventures that everyone has probably had, and that's what I love about it. This movie is just 5 relatable people doing relatable things, and it uses that relatability to hit you in the feels in some really unexpected ways. There's one short toward the end that's all about the mom and the grandma trying to make the dad intimidate some bikers outside their house because he's the man of the house, and he kind of fails miserably, but he has this whole fantasy of being this superhero who can do anything, but then it hard cuts back to him just silently sitting on this swing set, and it holds there for a solid like 15 or 20 seconds, and the full weight of it just hits you, and you're just like, wow. Damn. For the most part, this movie just feels like binging a season of a family sitcom. Over the course of the movie, we get to know all of these guys, except the little girl who kind of stops mattering after the first 20 minutes. You could say that the 2-hour runtime is too long, but I really disagree. That's like saying, hey, I tried to binge like every episode of Friends in one sitting. It was too much. They shouldn't have made so much. Like, it's a repetitive format, but who says that's a bad thing? Because I never wanted to stop watching. I always wanted to see the next short because I was attached to this family and wanted to see more of them. The whole appeal of this movie is how relatable it is. Sometimes it's to make us laugh, but just as often it's to make us sad. Just like any other Ghibli movie, it manages to capture the essence of humanity in ways I didn't even know was possible, and the animation style really works here. Sometimes there's barely even anything in frame, but it never really feels that way. Negative space gets used in some really cool ways, and there's still some wildly creative visuals regardless. And I like that the comic strip aesthetic was able to give us these character designs, which really work for this movie with how expressive they are. Like, if you don't like My Neighbors the Yamadas, that's fine. Opinions are subjective. But this is one where I just can't understand you. It's just such a feel-good movie, and I honestly struggle to think of anything wrong with it. I'll end off this review the way I ended it off last time. This isn't a movie about family growth. It's a movie about a family, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
What's your favorite movie?
Toy Story.
Fun fact, this is the second segment I've written the script for while in the waiting room at the dentist's office. The first one was Grave of the Fireflies back for episode 11, and now I'm doing it again. Anyway, Toy Story is a great start to a great studio. It's one of the best paced movies on this entire list, and that's a huge part of the reason why I enjoy it so much. That and an insanely creative premise, some really likable and iconic as hell characters, and 2 protagonists with some of the most relatable struggles ever. It's a really good thing that this movie did well, because as the first fully CGI animated movie, it kinda had to be the role model for all CGI animated movies. So if this movie wasn't as good as it was, who knows? There might never have been a Pixar or even a DreamWorks, which did kinda find its footing with 3D animation because of competition with Pixar. That simple fact kinda speaks for itself. If this movie wasn't one of the most memorable films from the 1990s, then people would not have remembered it. And aside from being memorable, it's also just a good movie in its own right. A lot of this film is just Woody and Buzz arguing with each other and trying to get back home, and even though the setting changes every so often, that's kind of just the whole movie, so it's a good thing that their dynamic is so great. Woody is definitely an asshole, but that doesn't stop us from sympathizing with him, and it makes his apology to Buzz at the end of the movie that much more impactful, and Buzz's character arc may not be as much about learning a lesson, but it's still just as great to watch. For most of the movie, he's sort of a joke, let's be honest. Oh, he thinks he's the actual guy the toy is based on. That's funny.
That's so funny! That's the funniest thing I've ever seen!
And then they hit us with this scene where Buzz just walks around in disbelief as he has an existential crisis, and it's like, whoa, okay, I guess we're doing this now. The pacing just wouldn't have been as good, and the movie just wouldn't have been as fun throughout if these two characters weren't as incredibly solid as they are. Throw in Sid and a giant car chase to end off the movie, and you're left with one of the most entertaining things in this entire video. The only way you could possibly make it any better is if you somehow expanded all of the themes Woody learns in this movie and challenges them in new and creative ways, which is exactly what happened in the next movie, and we'll see that in like 4 movies' time. I've always had a hard time talking about this movie for some reason. The second one, no, but for this one, I can never seem to sum up my thoughts in a way I'm satisfied with, and not even the magic of the dentist's office could fully fix that. At the end of the day, I like everyone in the movie, I like everything in the movie, the original songs are all amazing, and the animation has not aged very well at all, but it doesn't even matter, because Toy Story is just that good. Maybe that's why I can never find what to say. There is nothing to say. It's just a really good movie. If you had asked me 2 years ago, I never would have guessed that 101 Dalmatians would end up being one of my favorite animated movies from before 1990, but here we are, and honestly, I just become more convinced of this movie's epicness with every passing day. I think Disney switching to Xerox was a terrible idea overall, not in terms of whether or not the studio would survive, because I do understand that it was obviously necessary to save money and keep the company afloat, but still, all of the beautiful animation that Disney was famous for was completely gone now, and it wouldn't fully return for years. Sure, things like the Fox and the Hound managed to make Xerox work, but for every Fox and the Hound, there's an Aristocats or a Robin Hood, and overall, it just really sucks. But this movie is, I think, the one exception to that rule. I actually think that this pencil-y rough animation style suits the tone of this movie perfectly. Just like how the animation of Snow White contributed to its tone and made it a way more charming movie, this animation style makes this movie feel really unique. The vibe of this film isn't quite like anything else from its time, and it's the only vibe that I think works better for Xerox than for the old style. All of the character designs, settings, movements, you name it, all feel tailored to these new sketchy drawings, and they're not even that sketchy here. The rough outlines around the furniture and the trees and the buildings don't feel tacky and lazy like usual. They feel like a deliberate part of the movie, and that's not something I can say very often, or ever, about Xerox. Even the color choices feel like they were chosen to be part of a more like impressionist style. Not that I'm smart enough to fully understand what that means, but point is, effort was clearly put in here to make Xerox look actually great, something no movie after this was ever able to truly recreate. Every character is insanely likable. I love how the first part of the movie is just Roger and Anita meeting and falling in love, and Pongo and Perdita doing the same thing. I really appreciate how we're just allowed to see this family doing normal stuff like watching TV so that we can grow to like them. None of the dogs are the most fleshed out, but that's okay, especially because Roger and Anita, yes, the woman too in like 1961, both feel like actual real people, and I like both of them and their chemistry a lot. Plus, the main plot is so genuinely exciting and dark. Cruella de Vil is one of Disney's best villains. I think everyone knows this. Her iconic outfit, voice, mannerisms, just everything about her feels so creepy and weird, and it's great. She looks like someone who's strange enough to skin dogs and crazy enough to kidnap some in order to do it. There's literally one song in the whole movie. It's one of the best and most famous Disney songs ever written. And it's a diss track about how Cruella de Vil is the worst person to ever live. How great is that? And it's just another thing that adds to that like 60s vibe that Xerox captures so perfectly here. And Horace and Jasper are some of my favorite henchmen in probably like any movie. They bounce so well off of each other and make every scene they're in so much more fun while still being sort of threatening. And every part of the kidnapping and escape is paced really perfectly. We spend just enough time on the puppies being stolen, the puppies being held captive, and the whole escape, which is definitely the longest part, but still wasn't anywhere close to boring. Every single one of these scenes scenes has some level of actual tension. In my opinion, this is one of the easiest of the old Disney movies to get invested in, because we're given a perfect amount of time to grow to know and like the characters at the start, and then we're given a perfect amount of time to observe every other part of the story after that. This is just one of those movies where there's nothing really too special about any part of it, but it's just so solid the whole way through that anyone can watch it honestly whenever and have a great time. It's so good that when the author of the original book read the script of the movie, she said that it was an improvement over what she originally wrote. That should tell you quite a lot, and it's for that reason why I have to put it in the top 20 on this list.
Oh, for real? On God? Just like that?
The Hunchback of Notre Dame is near unrivaled in how majestic it is. I don't quite think it's as good as some of the other movies on this list, but the stuff in this movie that works. We might as well start off with the best part, the key thing that ties all of the epicness together. Frollo. It's Frollo. Frollo is one of the most horrifyingly evil people on this entire list. He's so absolutely against any and all sin, but he's so arrogant and so righteous and so confident in the fact that he was chosen by God that he literally cannot see his own flaws. The first line we hear about him is, he sees corruption in all but within. That's the reason Hellfire is such a downright scary song. He's attracted to Esmeralda, which is a sin, plus she's not white, so double sin, but he's so set in his belief that it's impossible for him to do wrong that he arrives at the conclusion that it's her own fault, somehow looping all the way back around to choose me or you will be burned at the stake. Killing you isn't a sin because it's your own fault to begin with somehow. Not only is this a song full of some topics that Disney doesn't typically touch on, but it's also a perfect way of showing how deranged this man is. He's so proud that he's totally contorted what his religion even says in the first place, and nothing, literally nothing, can possibly convince him that that's actually the case. On some level, he knows. It's what persuaded him to take in Quasimodo in the first place. It's what creates that visible underlying fear during this song and during Bells of Notre Dame that he legitimately might go to hell. But he's simply just too irredeemably evil. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no tragic origin story. He's just an evil person. Every little visual detail in this song, every line, carries so much weight behind it and transforms this hypocritical asshole into one of the scariest and most psychotic characters in all of Disney history. And none of the other more mature aspects of this movie that people love so much would work if this wasn't the case. But all the other characters are really good too. Every single one of them is really round and complex, and the movie puts in the work to make us care about them. I don't really need to explain why Quasimodo silently crying as he closes the church door with everyone in Paris watching is sad. You have eyes. You can tell. And Esmeralda serves as a great way to make Quasimodo challenge what he's been taught. Yes, they do use that word many times in this movie, that word that is not aged very gracefully. But on the flip side, at least the main person who uses that word is also very clearly an undeniably evil person. As someone who shares most of his genetics with said evil person, it's probably not my place to say how offensive this is, or not probably, it definitely is not my place to say how offensive this is, but we've seen worse today. On a side note, if any single person does actually watch this whole 6-hour, 5-hour, whatever thing in one day, thank you, but I'm also concerned for you. What I like the most, though, about Quasimodo and Esmeralda's relationship is the subversion of expectations. You think it's going to be a story of two people who are scorned for being different coming together, except that does not happen at all. Esmeralda falls in love with the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man, and we get this just absolutely tragic scene where Quasimodo just, silently weeps for the second time in this movie. I kind of wish he didn't start singing over it and just left it in silence with some of that sweeping instrumental music, but even still, it's devastating to watch, and it serves as a great way for him to realize that it shouldn't be about him being good enough for other people. It should be about him being good enough for himself, and the animation and songs are absolutely impeccable. Except for that one song, there are zero flaws with either of these things, and it does such a good job of getting us into the story. There's so many moments in this movie that are there just to make the audience go, whoa, Jesus Christ. Oh, that was a Notre Dame reference. Did you get it? Bells of Notre Dame is probably my second favorite opening number in any movie on this list, right after Deliver Us from the Prince of Egypt, which does everything this song does, but somehow even better. Hellfire, I already said, is transcendent. Even the ones I didn't really care about last time I've come around on, and except for that one, I now actually really like all of them. The visuals in all of these songs work so great, and it does kind of feel like Disney artistically peaked with this movie, but even not in the songs, the animation is always giving 1000%. The buildings always have so much detail, the gothic architecture is incredible, the character designs are all so fitting, and the shadows feel so much more advanced. Even in movies like The Lion King, which have the same sense of majesty as this one, the lighting just isn't as realistic, and it works wonders in so many places here. There are a few things I'm not a huge fan of that stop this film from being on the level of The Lion King. The last 30 minutes feel a bit stretched out. Between Phoebus getting shot and the end of the movie, I was definitely less interested, and I think it could have been condensed a bit. Most of that comes down to the Court of Miracles thing, which I just didn't find super fun to watch. And these gargoyles, wow, they are incredibly annoying. They're just so bad, and it honestly bothers me a lot more than it should because they're always around. So many emotional moments feel cut short because George Costanza decided that now would be a good time to come out and say,
all right, pour the wine and cut the cheese.
So a lot of the emotional impact in some scenes gets sort of dampened. This is still obviously a phenomenal movie, and I'm not even sure how I put it like halfway down the list last time. It might have genuinely just been an accident, like a mistake that I never caught. Easily a 9 out of 10, and if you would put this way higher, I honestly don't blame you. But the competition this far up the list is pretty fierce, and there are just a few things that I think some other movies do a little bit better. But it's not like any of that detracts from this movie's accomplishments. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a certified piece of art, and like everything else from the last 15 movies or so, an absolute must-watch.
How old is this milk?
Everything about The Great Mouse Detective works, and I'm sorry I didn't see it before. Like, originally I thought it was good, but I now view it as the certified epic movie that it always was. Basil is such a delightfully arrogant protagonist, and every single time he opens his mouth, it's guaranteed to be entertaining. He does the same thing as Cusco, where he's obviously kind of a jerk, but in a funny way instead of an annoying way, and when he learns his lesson at the end of the movie, his entire personality doesn't radically change. He's still clearly the same character, just slightly less asshole-ish. It worked in Emperor's New Groove, and it works here. Basil is just so fun, and the ridiculous ways that he uncovers these mysteries makes it even better, but obviously the best character is Ratigan, and there's no point trying to say anything about this movie without first mentioning him. He's the best character in the movie, one of the best Disney villains ever, and one of the best parts of any movie on this list. He's so evil and petty and aggressive, but he's also manipulative and calculating and just goddamn smart. And you can tell he just derives so much pleasure from trying to screw over Basil. I'm not the first person to mention this, of course, but what other Disney villain would have their master plan be to tie the main character up, and instead of monologuing in person, write an entire diss track, put it onto a record, and hook that record up to an entire Rube Goldberg machine designed to kill said main character in about 20 different ways? What other Disney villain, I ask you? His presence looms over the entire movie. It seems genuinely possible that this guy could actually trick Basil, the smartest man in the universe, into walking into a trap solely because he knows how arrogant he is and is able to exploit that perfectly to fit into his plans exactly the way he wants it to. His plan to kidnap a toy maker to build a robot queen who will then kidnap the actual queen so that he can assume control is a plot straight out of an old Disney cartoon, and it adds a whole other level of charm and excitement and interest to the movie. There's a reason that that fight between Ratigan and Basil on Big Ben is one of the best Disney scenes of all time, and Ratigan is a huge part of that reason. Also, the animation rocks. All of the character designs are great, all of the backgrounds are great, especially the castle and this toy store with all of the dolls and music boxes. Like, look how many details are in Basil's office. Look at these jewels. And sure, the CGI gears in the clock tower don't look perfect, but considering that this was like the first time ever that Disney made something on this scale with CGI, I think it doesn't actually look too bad at all. At this point, Xerox was on its way out anyway, but I think it's safe to say that any problems I ever had with it are no longer a thing, except for in Oliver and Company, but does that really count as a movie? The pacing is awesome, and none of these detours that Basil and the gang go on really feel like detours. I was interested the entire time, and I now understand perfectly why this movie was able to save the studio from bankruptcy. It's a masterpiece, and except for the mouse strippers, it has absolutely zero issues. You should all watch it now.
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
Toy Story 2 is a masterpiece, and not one that I have any problems talking about like the first movie. Now we have a different problem. I summed up my thoughts so well originally that I don't even know what parts to carry over here, so I guess this will be one of those times where I just recommend that you watch the original review if you want to know more. It's definitely on the long side, but there really is just that much to say about this movie. It takes the message Woody learned in the last movie about the love of a kid being more important than being his absolute favorite toy, but now he's forced to actually live through a much more extreme example of that as like an ultimate test. He's not just a slightly secondary toy anymore. He's at risk of not being played with at all, and when he's presented with the idea that he is and could become famous, the exact thing he was jealous of Buzz for in the last movie, it makes him seriously question whether it actually would be more fulfilling to live out his life behind glass. It's a smart way of continuing the first movie's themes, and this isn't the only way the film does this. You know all of the cool stuff the toys did in the last movie that was intrinsically tied to them being toys? Now, those things get scaled up. When you think about it, this whole traffic cone scene is just answering the question of how would some toys cross the street, and similarly, this whole elevator scene is just answering the question, how would some toys get to the highest floor of an apartment building? The stuff with Woody is really well done, but it's also kind of boring in big amounts, which is why the movie never gives it to us in big amounts, cutting back and forth between it and these really fun scenes of the other toys trying to get to Woody, which really focus on the fact that all of the characters are toys, and it makes the pacing of this movie honestly just as good as the last one. Throw in animation that's 50 times better than the last movie's, an epic twist villain, Jessie, the When She Loved Me song, fake Buzz, and a climax that's somehow even more insane than the last one, we get one of the most entertaining, funny, and surprisingly thought-provoking movies on this entire list. Again, if you want some more in-depth opinions, they're at your disposal right now in the form of the last part of episode 10, but this should give you a pretty good idea of why so many people hail this movie as one of the best Pixar movies, and it's certainly the best Pixar movie from the 20th century. Also, I wrote this one at the dentist's office too. I was waiting for a very long time, but that's A tier for you. The ultimate collection of phenomenal movies, and each one better than the last. Only one more tier to go. It has been a very long time. S tier. Love. That really is the only word for it. There are exactly 16 animated movies from the 20th century that I just love unconditionally. Either I grew up with them, or I connected with them in some personal way, or they're just that good. If a movie made it this far up, it's hands down, by definition, one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. Let's take a look at the first one.
I know you, I walked with you once upon a dream.
I didn't realize it for a really long time, but it turns out that for most of my life, Sleeping Beauty was the only Disney movie from before 1990 that I had ever seen. And I guess I liked it because I've seen it about 20 times, and now that I've seen everything else from before 1990, like literally everything else, I have to say, I picked a pretty damn good one to watch. It's the best of the old princess movies, it has the best animation by far, some of the best songs and characters, one of the best plots. I could go on. I don't think I ever fully realized how nostalgic I was for this movie, and I bet a lot of that has to do with just how beautiful it is. Yeah, there are plenty of scenes where not much happens, like any other old Disney movie, but the combination of the animation and the soundtrack works so well here that most of the time, those parts are even better than the actual plot scenes. As the last movie that Disney made before Xerox, they were at the top of their game in terms of detailed and over-the-top phenomenal animation. That's the biggest reason why this movie didn't earn its money back at the box office. Something that looks this incredible needs a pretty big budget, and Disney was willing to provide that. The castle looks gorgeous both inside and out. The forest is one of the most unique and distinct middle-of-nowhere green places I've ever ever seen. The effects for all of the magic are absolutely incredible and still look insanely impressive, 60 years later? Every single place we visit looks straight out of a painting, and I'll bet you anything that if someone picked a random singular frame out of the 100,000 in this movie, it would still be beautiful and awe-inspiring enough to hang up on your wall. Apparently they tried to make this movie look like a medieval tapestry, which is really cool, and they totally pulled it off. I've heard that some people think that the backgrounds are too detailed to the point where it distracts the audience from the actual characters, and I guess I can understand if you're one of those people, but I've honestly never thought that at all. The fact that the Once Upon a Dream scene on its own took over a year to make should speak volumes about the amount of effort that went into making this one of the most visually and aesthetically pleasing movies I've ever seen. Speaking of the songs though, they work so well with the animation to deliver so many fantastic and memorable scenes. Once Upon a Dream is one of my favorite Disney songs, and it's the reason this scene is so famous. But I know what you're gonna say. How can the songs work with the animation so well when this is basically the only song in the whole movie? Well, that's a great question. Even though this really awesome song gets multiple renditions throughout the movie, it does really suck that every other song that was going to be in this movie ended up getting cut, and I can't even fathom how perfect this film would be if they were still here. But the movie compensates for the lack of songs by having some of the best instrumentals of any Disney movie. There's no other Disney movie where I remember as much essentially background music as I do for this one, except maybe Beauty and the Beast, because I've watched it more than any other movie on this list. There's some music in this movie that's so epic that I would seriously just listen to it while like doing homework. It would give me the motivation I need to get a 200% on every test. Yes, most of this music was written by Tchaikovsky 130 years ago, but damn it, it still counts. And the plot is just so unique. I know they also didn't come up with this, but still, it doesn't feel like another one of those old Disney movies anymore. There is no waiting for the prince to save the day. The whole kingdom hears that only true love's kiss can save Aurora from her eternal sleep, and they all collectively go, well, that's stupid, and I'm not going to count on that. And so instead, they do the smart thing and ship her off to the forest for 16 years. Obviously, he still does save her, but the difference is that Aurora never sings a song about how one day some random prince will take her to his palace and marry her instantly. She sings a song about how she had a dream where she met a cute guy. There's a big difference there. And also, he doesn't save her. Maleficent kicks his ass, and the fairies have to enchant the sword that they gave him after they broke him out of prison to fly into the air and perfectly slice her heart in half. This guy, I love him, he doesn't do anything. There's still love at first sight and all that, but I don't think that love at first sight is inherently sexist, you know? And it certainly helps that both Aurora and the prince actually have some traits. It's amazing, I can't believe it. And Maleficent, I could stop there to be honest. Maleficent is one of the best classic Disney villains, maybe the best. She's so petty that she tears apart this whole family and sort of the whole kingdom just because she wasn't invited to a party. That's amazing. If you thought the queen from Snow White was irredeemably evil, take another look at Maleficent, and that pure evilness makes her so much more threatening. Like, she will do unspeakable things to torture the main characters. We should be afraid of her, and it keeps us on our toes the whole time. And this movie is paced perfectly. We get just the right amount of time to learn what's going on, we don't waste pointless minutes watching her grow up, and all of that charming, cartoony animation show-offing that all of these old movies do is focused mainly on Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather baking a cake and making a dress, and it's honestly some of my favorite filler content in any of these movies. Filler isn't even the right word. I absolutely love these three fairies and their dynamic, and all of their shenanigans make this one of the most charming and most nostalgic of the old Disney movies. Honestly, the sequence of scenes where they bake the cake and make the dress is some of my favorite Disney ever. Then we get just enough time dedicated to the sleeping curse, which gives us one of the most eerie and otherworldly scenes Disney has ever made, by the way, and then we get a final battle that also gets just the right amount of time. It feels like I'm missing a part of the movie, because it feels like that can't be it, but it is. It just goes by that fast. I'm just that interested. It's just that great. And even if I hadn't seen it like 20 times already before this series, I'd still put it this high. It's nostalgic, it's interesting, it's gorgeous, it's surprisingly funny, and I love it immensely. Sleeping Beauty is hands down my favorite pre-Renaissance Disney movie, and if I'm being honest, it's really not close. King Hubert, I dedicate this video to you. Yeah, it probably would have made sense to put this back down in the Christmas tier with The Grinch and Frosty, but combined, the 3 classic Charlie Brown holiday shorts are about the length of one movie, and that hypothetical movie is f***ing awesome. No time of year is more associated with a specific type of movie than Christmas movies are with Christmas, and no singular movie is more associated with Christmas or even just the holidays in general than this Charlie Brown holiday trilogy. Everything I said back in the Christmas tier about how Christmas movies can't even be judged as movies anymore because they've simply transcended that and have just become objectively good is 10 times, 20 times, 50 times more true for these. I don't think I've ever had a Thanksgiving where one of my teachers hasn't put on a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. I don't think it's even possible to think of Christmas without a Charlie Brown Christmas. It's the Great Pumpkin is also here. Whether you've seen these shorts or not, trick question, you definitely have, you still know so much stuff about them, especially the music. All the music. Vince Guaraldi, I'm probably saying your name wrong. You are an absolute genius. Linus and Lucy, Christmas Time is Here, The Great Pumpkin Waltz. I don't even know if these shorts are that good. I love them, but so does everyone else, and to such a great extent that I don't even know if they can be good or bad anymore. They're barely even movies anymore, or shorts, or whatever you want to call them. They are childhood incarnate, the holidays incarnate, nostalgia incarnate. And what's crazy is how permanently this will be the case. What these movies mean to me, they also mean to my parents and my grandparents and my siblings and cousins and everyone else. And when I have kids, trick question again, I definitely won't, there is an absolute 100% guarantee that that meaning will carry on. I probably should have ranked these with the other Christmas ones, but the impact of these 3 specials is somehow so much greater that it didn't even seem fair. I'm nostalgic for Frosty and the Grinch and 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, I guess, but I don't quite think they're S tier. Wherever they actually rank in there somewhere, it's not this high. But these absolute masterpieces that serve as a time capsule of every generation at the same time, they couldn't possibly be anything else. Also, I now get why A Charlie Brown Christmas has so many comments about people going commercial. It's a huge meta joke because the special was sponsored by Coca-Cola, and that's probably one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all?
Considering all of the things I just said about the Charlie Brown holiday specials, the fact that I still ranked Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer higher should tell you just how much I like it. And what's even crazier is that this isn't even the best Christmas movie on this list. This movie is just the ultimate nostalgic time bomb, although granted, it does share that title with at least 2 or 3 other movies. Every solitary frame of this film makes me so happy. Every single joke, every single line, every single song, and paired with the fact that it has a stronger plot than a lot of the other feature-length Rankin and Bass movies, it should come to no one's surprise that this one is near the top. The stop motion is really impressive considering that this is the first one of these they made, and more than anything, this just proves that these guys were on top of making something that can stand the test of time from the very beginning. Everything always works together so perfectly to create such a whimsical and nostalgic and happy feeling, and that's something that I feel this movie does best. I also feel like this is where these movies peaked song-wise. Obviously, the songs never really got bad. They stayed great and iconic until the very end, but here, they're just on another level. The Misfit song is a certified head-bopping classic. Everyone I know can tell you that every year come December, I hum We Are Santa's Elves 24/7. I still can't even believe Holly Jolly Christmas originally came from this movie. If I had to nitpick, which I definitely don't, but I'm going to anyway, I would mention that their detour to the island of misfit toys does sort of disrupt the pacing a bit, but at the end of the day, it really just doesn't matter at all. This is another situation where I don't even know if reviewing this movie is kind of possible, and I don't even have the dentist's office to give me my +10 eloquence buff anymore. All that really matters is that this is a good, fun, entertaining, enjoyable, awesome movie. I think that, you probably think that, and where it's ranked doesn't even really matter, so I'm just not gonna spend any more time talking about it. Rankin and Bass just made some good movies, and I should probably mention at some point that Bass died 9 days after I released my original video reviewing these movies, which was definitely just a coincidence, but I still feel partially responsible.
How'd you get here?
I was kidnapped by that wicked giant.
Oh, a giant!
A giant?
At the start of this tier, I mentioned how this is the place for the movies I either grew up with and love, or I really connected with and loved, and a select few that are just that good. The Iron Giant is just that good. As the very last movie I reviewed in the very last video I did in this series, this is the review that has changed the absolute least. And unsurprisingly, I still think it's a 10 out of 10. Picture the general story of How to Train Your Dragon with a kid finding a scary thing in the woods, but then realizing that it's actually really cute, so then the audience gets really attached to both of them, but then some people who are afraid of it and don't understand it want to kill it, so the kid has to keep it hidden, causing a bunch of entertaining scenes and culminating in an emotional ending where people realize that maybe the scary thing wasn't so scary after all, except here it's maybe even done better. I'm a big fan of How to Train Your Dragon, and I really like Hiccup and Toothless relationship in that movie, but somehow I feel like the Iron Giant's relationship with Hogarth is executed with even more mastery. The threat of the government feels very real in this movie, how topical, but so does the humanity of this thing that everyone believes is a monster, and so does the bond between these two people who see each other in ways no one else does, and it makes the end of this movie hit so much harder, with the words "I go, you stay" still echoing in my head, and it helps that the villain is one of my favorite characters on this whole list, and definitely my favorite character in the movie. Kent Mansley is the best parts of Kuzco and Gaston. He's funny, he's arrogant, and by the end of the movie, he slips into downright insane. This guy is so determined to get the government to believe him about the Iron Giant that you really do feel like he would do just about anything to make it happen. Even drop a nuclear bomb directly on top of the town he's in. It's such a delight anytime he's on screen, and it makes all of the scenes in the middle of the movie where Hogarth is trying to keep the Iron Giant hidden way funnier and way more entertaining. I think another reason this movie has a slight edge over How to Train Your Dragon is just the vibe of the movie. How to Train Your Dragon takes place on like an island in the North Sea, but this movie takes place in 1950s New England, and it's one of the most distinct feeling films I've ever seen because of that. Everything from the interiors of the houses to the diner that Hogarth's mom works at are so aggressively 50s that you practically feel like you're there. And like I said in the original video, it made me nostalgic for a time period that was over and done with 50 years before I was even born. And the fact that it takes place during fall gives every scene so much color. I doubt these cute little interactions between Hogarth and the Giant would have made as much of an impact if they weren't sitting in like the most gorgeous place you've ever seen. And you can really tell that Incredibles 2 was just trying to be this movie again with the vibe and the color palette, although clearly it didn't work. Please watch The Iron Giant. If you only have to watch one of all of the movies we've seen so far, let it be this one, although you should really watch everything from the last like 2 hours at least. But this beats all of those. The setting is beautiful, the action is gripping, every single character is likable, even the villains, the vibe is on point, it's funny, it's emotional, it's The Iron Giant. Like I said last time, this is not a movie that has any sort of real lesson behind it. Like, don't judge a book by its cover, I guess. But beyond that, this movie is just here to tell a story. This film is just Brad Bird taking you on an adventure, bringing you to the place where he grew up, and reading you a book about the time where a boy befriended a 50-foot tall robot. And it's one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Yeah,
heroes like Hercules.
Honey, you mean Hercules.
If you had asked me a year ago, I would not have said what I'm about to say, but Hercules is one of the easiest Disney movies to like, and I'm not even sure why. I mean, the plot is nothing really special. It's just your average nobody likes guy becomes famous, guy remembers value of friendship story, but it's done with so many unique elements and with so much love and passion. I wouldn't have put this movie above The Iron Giant, if I didn't think it deserved it, but it honestly does. Every scene where nobody likes Hercules is well made. Every scene building up to Hercules becoming famous is well made. Every scene with Hades plotting to kill Hercules is well made. Every character along the way is well developed and fun to watch. Every scene building up to the end is well made. The end itself is well made. And piece by piece, I realized that there isn't actually a single part of this movie that I don't like. Hercules is a really fun main character, and I really like his dynamic with Danny DeVito, who needs to be a character in every Disney movie. Hades is such a charismatic and funny villain, voiced by a less charismatic and funny villain, and he fits perfectly for the movie. He really feels like an evil and irredeemable monster, maybe because of who he's voiced by, I don't know, but it's done in such a funny way that it makes every scene with him such a treat, and his annoying sidekicks somehow weren't even annoying. And I also like Zeus. As the only version of Zeus who has things on his mind other than mortal women, I have to say that I really appreciate this guy. He's kind of a goofball, and compared to the stoic Sean Bean version we usually get, it's a nice change of pace. But the character who shines the most is definitely Meg. She's way more dynamic and complicated than the story needed her to be, and I'm incredibly grateful for that because she made the movie 10 times better. Her arc of needing to betray Hercules but ending up not wanting to, eventually sacrificing herself, isn't exactly original, but cliches are cliches for a reason. And if any story has the right to use cliches, it's a retelling of one of the first stories humanity ever wrote. Also, modern Disney, please take notes here. Notice how she's a strong and independent woman who does not need a man but still falls in love because the guy she likes is just a good person who inspires her to do the right thing. Notice how not everything is black and white here. Notice how we're able to care about the character tremendously, even though she's very vocal about how she can take care of herself, because the strength and independence has never been the problem. The problem has always been that there's nothing beyond that. But here, there is something beyond that, and the end result is the best character in the whole movie. Write this down. This will be on the test. Anyway, I wonder how that Acolyte show is going. I think people like it a lot. Let me see. The songs are probably the weakest part of the movie, but that's not to say they're bad at all. I like the idea of the muses, and I think they fit with the tone and setting of the movie. All of the scenes with them are really visually creative, and I think they're a smart way of delivering exposition. They all do their job and make us care about the characters and the plot a lot more, but like, the songs themselves are sort of just okay, and they don't exactly stand out, and some of the lyrics could have been workshopped a bit more.
Young Herc was mortal now, but since he did not drink the last drop, he still retained his godlike strength, so thank his lucky star.
Girl.
But again, none of them are actually bad, and Go the Distance is such a magnificent, show-stopping, catchy as hell, insanely memorable masterpiece of an I Want song that it honestly doesn't even matter anyway. Also, wow, Greece is insanely detailed, and Thebes is probably the second most real-feeling city on this whole ranking after Kuriko from Kiki's Delivery Service, but we'll get there. Honestly, every setting looks beautiful. Olympus, the River of Souls, even this pretty generic-looking training area has a lot of personality to it, and all of the character designs and creature designs are really memorable too, probably because they're all super exaggerated to fit the art style of the movie, which also looks great. The only part that's aged badly is the CGI on the Hydra, which, yeah, is very noticeably outdated, but the fight itself is still really engaging and cool, which I feel like is more important. Plus, look at all of these sick-looking shots. Hercules is definitely one of the Disney Renaissance movies with slightly less going on, but it's still such a relentlessly fun experience from start to finish that I would still place it higher than some movies with like an actual emotional core, which this one generally doesn't. What's crazy though is that this is number 12 on the list, and it's only the 6th best Renaissance movie. Be prepared for Disney overload very shortly. The Year Without a Santa Claus is my favorite Christmas movie of all time. Not just on this list, but just ever. I love every single frame of this ridiculous hodgepodge of a movie, and if the Polar Express didn't exist, I would definitely make it a tradition to watch this one every Christmas Eve. The plot is really enjoyable, but what really puts this one above the rest for me is the fact that this movie surprisingly does have an emotional core. The whole catalyst for this movie is that Santa has a cold, and as he lies in bed, he starts to wonder if any children even care about Christmas anymore, and he gets so depressed about this that he cancels Christmas, and so it's up to Mrs. Claus and these two elves to find proof of Christmas spirit to cheer up Santa, and they can barely find any. It's one of the only times in these movies where there's like a real theme to latch onto, and it's also one of the only times where Santa is the main character. Yes, I know they made a whole movie that was basically his origin story, but here, we're really able to just look at Santa as a real person in a way that we don't really get to see anywhere else. And the end of the movie where he gets cards from children all around the world telling him that they love him and they miss him, making him realize that he actually does still matter, and people do still care about him, is somehow actually sort of emotional. It's just a more deep movie, not majorly. Like, this isn't some profound experience that will change your outlook on life, but it does take everything I love about these Rankin and Bass movies and adds a little something extra, and it's for that reason that it's my favorite one. You thought I wasn't gonna talk about the Miser Brothers? How wrong you are. All of that stuff is well and good, but you want the real reason why this is my favorite of the old Christmas movies? It's these two petty middle-aged men who collectively share the best Christmas song ever written. So basically, Mrs. Claus and the elves need to convince these guys to let it snow in the South because the mayor of this one town made a sarcastic comment about how it never snows in the South, so if it snows, then he's legally obligated. These Christmas movies have definitely been the odd one out in this video. They're definitely not quite like the rest of the films we're covering here, but they're all just so goddamn memorable, even the ones I don't really like. They're icons, they're legends, and they are the moment. And guess what? They've been the moment for the last half a century. And you know what? I don't think that's gonna change anytime soon. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass created an empire that will withstand the test of time, giving nostalgic and happy memories to children for years to come. And that's what Christmas is all about, right? Hell, some of that nostalgia doesn't even have anything to do with Christmas. These two guys did something that nobody else has ever been able to do, and certainly not as consistently. The world would be objectively worse if these movies didn't exist. And it's for that reason why I salute you, gentlemen. Thank you for your service. Sorry, I may or may not have accidentally killed one of you.
Hi everybody, it's me, Mickey Mouse.
The Secret of Nim is just another one of those movies that's this high up because it's just that cool. You really wouldn't think it, but this is one of the most engaging and creative movies I've ever seen. Mrs. Brisby is such a surprisingly brave character. The stuff she does to make sure that her family stays safe as she's thrust into this entire other world she didn't know existed that her husband was apparently a part of actually shows an insane amount of courage. And even though she isn't one of my favorite movie protagonists or anything, and even though her son dying from pneumonia isn't one of my favorite inciting incidents, you can't help but root for her the whole way through. This movie is just such a cool combination of dystopia and fantasy, taking a pretty dark idea and exploring it from the mice's perspective in some seriously cool ways, like moving day, having to move your house when the plow comes by. It's just a little thing that makes this world of mice living on some human's farm a bit more real, but that's nowhere near as cool as this underground rat society, which has so many creative details throughout that elevate the world building so much. Plus, it just looks amazing. That sequence where they're just walking through these corridors to get to the main council room is one of the best parts of the movie just because of how cool it is. I'll talk more about this in like 20 minutes or whatever, but Don Bluth's first couple of movies have some great animation. All of the backgrounds still have that painting feel that everyone thought had disappeared with the Disney Silver Age. Every interior has so much detail, the magic effects are really awesome looking. Nicodemus really looks like a creature corrupted by some unknown force, and I guess technically he is that. All of the environments and landscapes are worthy of being hung up on a wall. Although, what sort of animation glitch is this? Why does Nicodemus's forehead extend all the way to the ceiling here? The main villain isn't particularly interesting, and a lot of the side character rats don't really have much going on either. And I don't think this bird is really anyone's favorite, even though he definitely isn't as annoying as he could be. But it's not like any of that really detracted from the overall movie that much. Just like last time, I really don't have much to say at all. It's really good, but it's also really self-explanatory why it's really good. It's interesting, it's exciting, it's creative, it's surprisingly morbid at times, and it was a really great start for the most inconsistent director of all time.
You're the guy who killed my parents. Where you been, man? In your reflection.
When I was a kid, I always thought that Aladdin was about as good as Disney could get, and when I reviewed it for this series, I was very determined to not be blinded by nostalgia, so I ended up criticizing it and nitpicking random stuff way too much. A lot of the issues I had last time didn't make it into the video, and I still liked the movie, but I just didn't have as much fun. Maybe I was just blinded by nostalgia. Before I retired this movie from discussion on my channel, which will probably be the case for most of the movies in this video, at least I hope so, I wanted to settle once and for all how good Aladdin really was. So this rewatch, I made a point to not think about its quality at all and just watch the movie. And I've now come back around to the exact same opinion that I had when I was 5. Aladdin is in fact an absolute masterpiece. You wouldn't think that Aladdin is that complex of a character, but in retrospect, it turns out that he's rounder than you would think. I never realized they leaned into his insecurities and his lack of self-worth so much, but once I started noticing it, it made me like him even more. I always liked him and rooted for him as a kid, but I was never able to put a reason to it beyond the fact that he's just a charismatic character, which he still is. But now I think that a huge part of why I care about him so much and get so invested in his story is the satisfaction we feel as he realizes that he actually is worth something after all, and that he doesn't need to be a prince externally, because he was really a prince inside all along. It sounds cheesy, but if it works, it works. And it works. Not really sure where him killing his parents factors into the story, but I'm willing to concede a few plot holes here and there. And Jasmine is also really good here, and nowhere else. Again, modern Disney, please take notes. Notice this female character who is both strong and independent, and yet never mentions either of those things by those words, because the writers trusted that we could see that for ourselves, and because she's an actual person instead of like a mouthpiece for a moral you can tell the movie doesn't even really believe in, it makes it a lot easier to like her. It's amazing how that works. We can sympathize with her struggles so much more easily now that it's not directly tied to the patriarchy, which is kind of just become a buzzword that makes people's eyes glaze over. I mean, it is tied to the patriarchy. That's like the whole idea. But the movie instead chooses to focus on how her struggles affect her instead of just having her say over and over again, this system is wrong and sexist. I do not like it. I would very much like if we had a different institution in place. Yeah, duh. We can see that for ourselves and we know it's bad. The movie trusts us to put 2 and 2 together, and the end result is one of the best characters in a movie with basically no bad characters. Even characters like Jafar, who don't have as much going on really at all, are still really fun to watch. I wouldn't say he's one of my absolute favorite Disney villains, but he's not bad by any means, and he's exactly what the story required. I love this dude and how threatening he is at all times, and I appreciate that he's not like a complete doofus and actually uses his wishes in intelligent ways. It makes the end of the movie feel really dire. He does go through his wishes a bit fast, but that's because he's an arrogant prick, and it's not like he's wasting them. If anything, it just makes it even more satisfying when he still gets outsmarted. And speaking of the wishes, I guess we should talk about the genie now. Don't get me wrong, I love Robin Williams and his performance in this movie, and I always have. However, he was one of my biggest problems when I originally reviewed this movie. He kind of got on my nerves a few times. There were just a few too many impressions and a few too many jokes, and there were a few too many emotional moments cut short by like Julius Caesar or some random person showing up when it wasn't really necessary. He's still a great character, and his ability to switch between heartfelt and funny on a dime is insanely impressive. None of that has ever been up for debate, but I just couldn't help but wish he was a bit more heartfelt and a bit less funny at times. And then I watched King of Thieves, a movie where the genie impersonates Elvis Presley and Mrs. Doubtfire and also every Disney character ever, and I now no longer see any issues with the genie here. End of discussion. I also really like the animation style. It allows the characters to be really expressive, and just like with Hercules, I think that it really fits with this type of story. Plus, Agrabah looks really incredible. Sure, it could take place in any number of regions all around the world, but that doesn't change the fact that these simple city streets are somehow so iconic to me that they've been permanently ingrained in my memory, and that definitely means something. And the songs are still phenomenal too. As the first movie released after Howard Ashman's death that he wasn't like fully involved in, there was definitely a chance that Disney would immediately drop the ball and give us a bunch of subpar songs, immediately dragging down the movie's quality and immediately terminating the Disney Renaissance. Luckily, that didn't happen for like 5 more years, and the soundtrack is just as immaculate the whole way through as it was before. And let me clarify, this isn't to downplay Ashman's importance. Actually, the complete opposite. Howard Ashman is probably my favorite guy in all of Disney history. His formula is what made this movie work, at least to the extent that it did. And you can hear his influence in every single song. Not only are the melodies of every song fantastic, but the visuals for the songs have also been enhanced. The breathtaking eye candy that is Be Our Guest has been multiplied by 100 for Friend Like Me. And Tale as Old as Time, as much as I love it, is also just sort of a precursor to the untouchable magnum opus of Disney love songs that is A Whole New World. They rhyme splendid with when did. That's incredible. There wasn't really an adjustment period after Ashman where Disney needed to get back on their feet. His formula was so simple and so rock solid, and it worked so well that there was no question what to do for this movie, and they nailed it. So it turns out that Aladdin is actually a really great movie. After hours of script writing and video editing over the last 2 years, I've arrived at the exact same conclusion that I reached back in like 2009, watching the genie bounce around the TV as I sat on the couch with my sippy cup. It's simply a 10 out of 10 film. Yes, culture-wise, huge mess. Huge mess. But as a movie, I can honestly find very few issues with it. It has officially been welcomed back into the ranks of my favorite movies of all time, and I couldn't be happier about it. Without The Little Mermaid, we simply would not have animated movies anymore. Part of me wants to amend that statement by saying, no, that's kind of an exaggeration, but honestly, I'm not sure that it is. The 10 movies in the Disney Renaissance radically changed Disney as a studio, animation as a medium, and the entire world's perception of what a silly little cartoon can do, in a time when it seemed like we had kind of forgotten. For more than half of the movies in this time period, you could say that it's the best Disney movie ever made by far, and I would have nothing to say to counter it. And without this film about a fish girl with big dreams, we would have none of it. I don't know how many times I've told this story on the channel, but I'm going to tell it again, and this certainly won't be the last time. This is Howard Ashman, the man whose contribution to both this movie and Beauty and the Beast, and also the whole Disney Renaissance, and also all of Disney, and also everything, cannot be overstated. Ashman knew that animation was a perfect medium for musical theater, and he knew that if all of the characters were allowed to sing not just about anything, but about their emotions and how they felt about the story, it could create something genuinely magical. And so the power duo of Ashman and Alan Menken set to work on making the songs for The Little Mermaid, although in reality Ashman's role in developing both of the films he worked on went far beyond just the music. You can basically say he directed them. Part of Your World puts us in Ariel's position and shows us exactly what she's missing under the ocean and lets us feel how badly she wants to see what else there is to life. Under the Sea develops a sort of counter argument for why Ariel should actually stay in the ocean. Poor Unfortunate Souls tells us everything we need to know about Ursula, letting the audience realize without explicitly stating it that this crazy octopus lady,
Ursula's crazy sister,
is a trickster and a manipulator who can't be trusted even if Ariel doesn't realize it in time. And Kiss the Girl shows the feelings that Ariel and Prince Eric now have for each other. Anytime a character is feeling some sort of way, or thinking some sort of plot-relevant, important thing, they show that increased emotion and increased importance by breaking into song, by presenting the key emotional beats of the story in this high-energy, memorable way. We can really feel like we're experiencing the movie right alongside the characters. Look up like Howard Ashman Little Mermaid interview on YouTube if you want to hear it from the man himself. There's a lot of genuinely good advice in there. So obviously the movie was well liked, and Disney said, hey, you guys want to work on Beauty and the Beast? But by that time, Ashman was dying from complications from AIDS, and knowing how valuable Ashman was to the film, the entire pre-production was moved from London to New York so that he could continue to work on it, and we already know how tremendously successful that was. Beauty and the Beast is kinda good, but we'll talk more about this part later. Point is, this one man was so influential in reshaping how Disney made all of their animated movies for the next decade that it really isn't an overstatement to say that he probably saved animation entirely. The last movie that came out before The Little Mermaid was Oliver and Company. Animation at best was gonna last like 5 more years without this movie. I mean, there were obviously other things about The Little Mermaid that make it so good. The pacing is incredible. I was surprised by this the first time, but everything really is given just the amount of time it needs, and it never feels boring. The animation is also incredible. The underwater scenes look especially beautiful, which is good considering that's where the movie takes place. The way the light refracts and reflects and bends and shimmers and diffracts and diffuses and all of those things that light does make this already impressive underwater kingdom seem even more impressive. But even more gorgeous than the underwater stuff is surprisingly the stuff on land. Before watching this movie, I never would have guessed that Prince Eric's kingdom would have been the aesthetic highlight of the movie, but it actually is. This courtyard that Ariel runs through with Eric and like 5 seconds of film is actually one of the nicest places in the whole movie. Like, every single building and every single room, all the way down to the French guy's kitchen, has so much detail, and what's probably just as important as the songs is how much identity all of the characters have. Ariel's silent excitement at seeing all the human things, Sebastian's constant anxiety that he's going to be smote into a Red Lobster item for losing Ariel again, King Triton's constant anger at his daughter, which we come to realize is more fear than anything else, Ursula's body language, Ursula's crazy sister, Prince Eric's dialogue and scenes actually to himself, which I don't think any prince before him except Philip ever actually had. And no, Ariel did not abandon her whole family just for a man. I gotta mention this at least once. Did you miss the whole I Want song where she says she wants to see the human world and never mentions men once? She mentions women by name. Not men, though. This is not an issue with the movie. Be mad at Peter Pan instead. There's so much other stuff to be mad at. Just not this movie. I really don't have much else to say on this movie. Its amazing songs and influence on the future of animation are really the only things that I don't think people talk about enough, which is why I hammered that home so much. And it hasn't even been that long since I first watched it anyway, so I don't really have the same deep emotional connection with it that I do for a lot of the other movies this high up. The world has had 35 years to come to love this movie and everything that it stands for, and even though I've only had about 18 months of those 35 years, I still love it nonetheless. I loved it after a day of those 35 years. It's just a good movie. These final 7 movies, though, are the ones that I consider to be legitimately perfect. Think of it as like an S+ tier if you want. Kiki's Delivery Service is one of the most low-stakes movies ever, except for the part where a second blimp hits the clock towers at the end. The most dramatic thing that happens in this movie is probably that Kiki gets a cold, and it's entirely by design. This is just a cute slice-of-life movie about a girl in a new place trying to find her footing, and she just happens to fly on a broomstick. There really is no overarching plot other than the one sentence I just described. But that's what's so great about it. Just like so many of the other great Ghibli movies, this film is essentially just an episode in the life of the main character, and it works wonders here. Now, this sort of style of movie is bound to have some people complaining about, so what's even the point of watching it then? But that really doesn't make any sense. In fact, I'd argue that this way of getting to know a character and story by looking at every tiny thing might be even better for exploring some sort of theme, and in this case, the theme is essentially burnout. Kiki loves being able to fly, but once she starts having to fly for a job as a mail deliverer, it starts to take all of the fun out of it, and she has to rediscover what she liked about it in the first place. She loses her spark, and so she can no longer fly, because flying is really just a representation of her motivation. And I believe very strongly that we would not have cared about this message or this character's struggle nearly as much if we hadn't seen these mundane character interactions throughout the first half of the movie. And that really is the core of why this movie works. Kiki arrives in a new place and immediately experiences a whole lot of struggle because she has no idea what to do. She's like 13 years old. Then she meets Osono, this wonderful baker lady here, and her husband, and they let her stay with them for some small fee. But we're given plenty of time to see, through these small, mundane interactions, how nice these people are, and it skyrockets our interest in the movie and in the situation. There is a direct correlation between how much time we spend with these characters and how much we learn about them, and there's another direct correlation between that and how much we like the characters. But what makes the core of the movie really fit is the second half of the movie, which ties the whole idea together. So at around the halfway point, after we've spent a whole bunch of time with this delightful old lady making a pie for her granddaughter, Kiki delivers it in the rain, misses something she wanted to do, and then the granddaughter acts like a snotty bitch, and it kind of makes Kiki rethink everything. You see this shot here? Yeah, they hold on this for like 6 seconds, and then she gets a cold because she was in the rain, and now she can't fly anymore. This was her breaking point, where she started to lose the motivation for something she used to love. I, as a teenager who makes YouTube videos in his spare time, can definitely not relate to this at all, but all of the characters we met in the beginning who we now care about and who have developed a friendship with Kiki because of her flying help her through her rough time and help her rediscover what she loved about it in the first place. Quite literally, the friends she made along the way. Whether it's Osono, the old lady, the artist girl in the woods, or even Tombo, all the people we got to know through these mundane interactions help her remember the joy of life. The slice of life style isn't some problem. It's the key reason why I love this movie so much. That and all of the other things Ghibli does so well. The animation in this movie is some of the best I've ever seen, and Koriko is the most real feeling, not realistic, but real feeling setting in any animated movie I've ever watched. And the music, oh my god, I can't even, dude, if you let me just talk about the music, I'd talk for hours. This video would be twice the length. I'd go through every single note. It's so transcendent that it somehow makes other Ghibli soundtracks feel just okay. Joe Hisaishi has never made a bad song, and every one of these Ghibli movies I watched last year brought another song immediately to the top of my playlist, but I will never change my mind that this movie is his absolute magnum opus. The accordion gives everything such a unique feel. The main overture so perfectly captures the vibe of this movie that it makes me want to cry. And A Town with an Ocean View is hands down the best song Hisaishi has ever written. Better than The Girl Who Fell from the Sky, better than Path of the Wind, better than Bygone Days, better than everything from Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle, which I haven't even seen, but don't think I haven't heard the music. I don't know, this movie is kind of just the quintessential Ghibli movie in like every way. In episode 11, I yapped about this movie way more, like for 10 minutes, so if you want more details, I can and have given them, but I think that's good for now. Kiki's Delivery Service is simply a 10 out of 10, and one of the most perfect movies I've ever watched. And yet there's still one Ghibli movie that's higher. There's nothing for me to say about The Lion King that hasn't already been said. As of me writing this script, it turned 30 years old like last week, which means there have officially been 3 decades worth of compliments paid to this movie that I get to repeat word for word because there's really no way not to. Even as a kid, when adding numbers with 2 digits instead of 1 felt impossible, and starting kindergarten felt like the most difficult and horrifying thing I would ever have to do, I was still able to appreciate how majestic this movie was. People say that this movie is basically just Hamlet. It's not. I've read it now. It's not. It has an evil uncle. It has a dead father, and that's it. It's not. But the way everything unfolds still feels so Shakespearean. The beautiful and fluid and colorful animation, the sweeping score by Hans Zimmer, and even just the direction combined to make this story about the disruption of the natural order and about a little kid growing up to avenge his father feel like the most important thing that has ever happened. Think about it. There are so many iconic scenes in this movie that it would genuinely be easier to list the scenes that aren't. Let me list out some of my favorites. Circle of Life, Everything the Light Touches, I Just Can't Wait to Be King, The Elephant Graveyard, The Great Kings of the Past, Be prepared, with Scar on top of the world with his whole army laid out below him. The wildebeest stampede with its frantic music perfectly encapsulating this moment that would change everything. The sequence of Scar letting his brother fall as the camera zooms out from Simba screaming, which takes about 5 seconds but feels like an eternity. Simba nuzzling his dad as he realizes that he won't wake up. Hakuna Matata, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? The scene with Rafiki with some of the most profound dialogue in any animated movie. The spirit of Mufasa in the clouds, telling his son to remember his destiny and avenge him. Wait, that is a lot like Hamlet, isn't it? The fight between Simba and Scar, ending with Scar being devoured by his allies. And the last shot, where the circle of life begins anew. Those are just some of my favorite scenes. Notice how that's the entire movie. Every character is good, every song is good, the movie's actually funny, and the comic side characters are actually great, like some of Disney's best. The backgrounds are beautiful. I can't think of any more to say. This is, at the end of the day, not a movie to say things about, especially after 30 years, now that every little small detail, down to the sex in the pollen, that makes this film the masterpiece that it is, has already been pointed out. This is a movie to be experienced. It's just one of those rare things where just one day all the stars aligned and told a simple story to the absolute best ability that humans possibly could, like the Iron Giant. But I've been watching this movie since I was old enough to understand what the characters were saying. The Lion King doesn't speak to me or resonate with me in some special way. It speaks to me and resonates with me in a very non-special way. The same way it resonates with literally everyone else. It's just an epic movie.
Oh my god. I get it.
Well, this is the last thing I expected, but I actually love An American Tail now. Like, I still think it peaks in the first 20 minutes, and I still think the plot is a bit too non-existent for everything after that, but I've had a sort of realization that's fundamentally changed the way I feel about this movie. I kinda have a love-hate relationship with Don Bluth. His movies from the 1990s are truly some of the worst things I've ever seen. There's a reason that episode of this series took me 3 months to make, but his 1980s work is genuinely not just good, but crucial to animation as a whole surviving to this day. He gave Disney a wake-up call that they needed to get their act together, and he sent a message to the rest of the world that more in the realm of animated movies was possible. There's a clip of him basically saying that people don't care about animation anymore, so if he makes a movie, it has to be good. But if Disney makes a movie, it has to be equally good. Don Bluth didn't leave Disney for competitive purposes. He did it to save animation, and he gave us 4 pretty epic movies in order to do it, and 6 others as well once animation was saved, which is why, even though I don't think this movie is perfect, it clearly has that magic spark that Don Bluth, like it or not, brought back to animation. So with all that in mind, knowing what I know now about Don Bluth and having a sort of begrudging respect for him, I tried to go into this movie with a different frame of mind. And all of a sudden, I understood. I was enlightened. An American Tail, it turns out, is one of my new favorite movies. Like, seriously, I actually love this now. I never would have guessed that this would end up being my favorite Don Bluth movie. But it managed to top every single one. Rewatching this, I kinda knew that I would be impressed by the first 20 minutes and then everything after that would slowly get worse and worse. And some of that was true, I guess. The first 20 minutes still rock, they're awesome. Starting things off with this mouse family fleeing Russia and trying not to get killed by these cats is such a killer way to start the movie, and all the stuff on the boat just keeps it going. There Are No Cats in America is way better than I remember, and the description of the American dream that it gives is really great. Fievel, who by the way is still the cutest character in any movie I've ever watched, up there with Baby Dory, getting washed out to sea was insanely tense and sad, and the family mourning at the immigration office really got to me. And by the time he made it to New York City, I kinda let out a sigh and went, well, that was fun. Time to be chronically disappointed now. But it just never happened. And when I really tried to digest the point of the movie, I realized how perfectly realized this analogy really is. First off, the fact that there are in fact cats in America and the streets aren't paved with cheese is a pretty intact and very not subtle metaphor. Don Bluth clearly had a message in mind with this movie, and he made sure to never lose sight of it. It holds up for the whole film, and it creates this really excellent story about immigrants coming over the ocean to start a new life that isn't entirely new in all the ways they hoped. Social commentary is present in nearly every scene, and it's great. Yeah, it's often pretty on the nose too. None of them are explicitly stated, but you can always feel its presence, probably because so much of it isn't really trying to be too subtle, and it makes this movie just way more deep than I remembered, and that's probably because the project was commissioned by Steven Spielberg, who is Jewish, and was written mainly by Jewish writers, and pretty much every little detail, right down to Fievel taking his grandfather's hat, was adopted from real-life stories. What a mature and intelligent thing for Don Bluth to do. He knew, hey, my dad was one of the early leaders of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Maybe there's someone other than me who can work on this movie and have it accurately portray the message that I want it to, and this choice absolutely paid off. Everyone involved cared about this movie, and you can tell. Without knowing all of this, which was the case last time I watched this, I can definitely understand not liking some of this too much. It's not very plot-focused, Fievel just meets a few too many side characters, and even the main conflict of building a giant mouse to scare away the cats feels kind of like a side quest, or at least that was the case. Somehow none of these things matter anymore. I can't even see them. I used to think that if this was a short film that took the first 20 minutes, cut out like a third of the random fillery segments, and then brought it back for the end, only then would it be truly good. But then the parts that I remembered being painstakingly boring really weren't. The movie just kept going. I kept enjoying it. I went in thinking, I know that once we get to this point, the movie gets good again, and I blinked and we were there. And I cannot describe how shocked this made me. I paused the movie and I just thought about what I watched. I thought about all of the songs. There Are No Cats in America is great. Somewhere Out There was so good that it became a huge pop song that most people don't even know is from this movie. Even the Statue of Liberty song is good, and the movie looks gorgeous. One of the things that I think made so many people latch onto Don Bluth's work in the 1980s was A, that it was good, and B, that he delivered some beautiful looking movies in a time that Disney was making, The Black Cauldron. New York is so well realized, and that scene of Fievel saying that it's hopeless as the camera zooms out to show dozens of children sitting there in the rain along with him is such a goddamn powerful image. I thought about every character moment, every time Fievel was dragged down, every time he used his optimism and innocence to bring the American dream to a group of people most prevented from achieving it. I thought about every time I laughed, and every time a line gave me chills because of its real-life parallels.
Papa, why did they change my name to Tilly?
There was no one point during my rewatch that I actually realized it, but by the end, I was certain. An American Tail is a masterpiece, and I unpaused the movie and watched its conclusion. You want to know something? Fievel reuniting with his family, hearing each other's voices and running toward each other before giving his dad this giant hug as the music swells and the whole family comes together again, is the only scene in any of the 92 movies on this list that actually made me cry. Of all the stuff we've seen and of all the stuff in the 4 movies yet to come, this was the one thing that got to me, and since then, every time I've thought about this movie, I've liked it more and more, until the movie that was originally in the bottom quarter of the list for being too boring worked its way into the top 15, then 10, then 5, cementing itself as the best Don Bluth movie of all time. It seems we're at an impasse, Mr. Bluth. You've created some truly unacceptable garbage in your time, but I somehow can't even bring myself to care anymore. The impact you made on animation cannot be overstated, and the 3 movies you made that I like genuinely do compensate for the 7 you made that I don't. You may have made some of my least favorite movies of all time, but you know what? It's part of what makes you you. It's been a bumpy road, Don, but now that we're at the end, I can happily say that it was all worth it. You have the worst movie on this list, and you have some others not too far behind. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Goodbye, my friend. Whisper of the Heart is the best Ghibli movie from the 20th century. I didn't think anything could beat Kiki's Delivery Service, and then I watched this movie for about 10 minutes and saw that it wasn't actually 10 minutes, but rather 50 minutes. Then the whole last half of the movie unraveled, with scene after scene after scene of some of the most deeply personal moments I've ever experienced in a film. Wow, that's the same thing I said for Kiki's Delivery Service. No, you misunderstand me. I love Kiki's Delivery Service, but I love Whisper of the Heart. This is yet another movie that I yapped about for 10 minutes last October, and I don't think I could possibly sum up my thoughts any better than I did there. I'll be saying that once again, don't worry, but I'll give you the shorter version. This is yet another slice of life film, but like even slicier and lifeier. Even Kiki's Delivery Service had magic. Shizuku is just a normal person, just a normal human being who's going through the normal human issue of having no idea what she wants to do with her life. And that's the entire point. So, Shizuku is a 14-year-old girl who really wants to be a writer, but the only thing she's managed to do with that dream is rewrite the lyrics to Country Roads over and over again. Over the course of the first half of the movie, she gets to know this guy, Seiji, who seems like he has his entire life figured out, so that understandably freaks her out a bit. And when he goes off to Italy for 2 months, she sets herself a goal: write an entire novel before he gets back in order to prove to herself that she's good enough to be with him. But for the next 2 months, even though she makes progress, she isn't happier. Her relationship with her family weakens as she spends all of her time in her room, and her grades in school drop as she spends all of her class time staring down at her notebook. And despite all of this, she's still barely going to finish in time. Her motivation disappears, and as time runs out, she kind of just falls apart. This scene where she sort of just sinks out of her chair and curls up on the ground does not have a single line of dialogue, but it does such an amazing job of displaying this universal human experience of feeling like you're just a failure and it can't be helped. And that really is what makes this movie so supremely relatable to me. I've never tried to write a novel in 2 months to prove I'm as on top of things as a cute boy I met, but this movie somehow manages to find some appeal to like the human condition in literally every scene, and it does this with such versatility and ability and dexterity and stupendability that I genuinely believe anyone can relate to this movie as if they went through this exact situation themselves. I think that's a huge sign of a great movie. You may not be able to empathize with the situation, but you can empathize with the thoughts behind the situation. And this film displays those thoughts so beautifully and makes them the core of the narrative. Seeing Shizuku start to cry when the old man didn't say, "Wow, this is the best book I've ever read in my whole life," is absolutely devastating. And I don't think I'm devastated solely because of the "that's the worst thing that's ever been made" illness that all YouTubers contract after they upload a video. Every little detail in this movie is so perfectly magical, whether it's the Baron or this clock or this old man and his geode, and some bigger details as well, like all these fantasy sequences that give the audience an idea of what Shizuku's book is about, or this scene where Shizuku sings Country Roads with Seiji and the old man and all of his friends accompanying her as they're all bound together because of her dream, suggesting that maybe she isn't failing quite as much as she thinks she is. This scene is in my top 10 movie scenes, by the way. I don't have an actual list, but like this has got to be in there. The animation is beautiful. Every character is insanely likable and relatable. The pacing is perfect. The message can resonate with pretty much everyone, but especially me, who once had to write down with my own hands the exact words I'm saying right now, along with every other word I've ever said on this channel. Whisper of the Heart is just a good movie. Again, I have 10 minutes of thoughts 3 clicks away, and Shea Freilis has like 80 minutes of thoughts another 3 clicks away. Don't let this be your first Ghibli movie, otherwise you're going to be very disappointed, but please, let this be your second. The world has slept on this movie for too long, and the rush of serotonin you'll get for the rest of your life every time you randomly hear Country Roads is an added bonus. No, I didn't forget about this movie. It really is this high. I might be the biggest Mulan fan in the entire world, which is crazy because I've only seen this movie about 5 times. That's more times than I've seen a lot of the other movies on this list, but for a Disney Renaissance movie, absolute child's play. And yet there's something so entertaining about this film to me, and I honestly don't quite know what it is. The themes are absolutely on point and are explored so well. It's one of the only times that Disney has ever told a story about rejecting gender norms that doesn't completely suck. And it's because this time around, they clearly didn't do it just to say that they did it. There are so many lines in this movie where you can tell every word was specifically chosen, and it works. I love watching movies with some sort of social commentary that don't patronize me during my entire viewing experience. Insulting your audience is a really bad way to get them to open themselves up to a new opinion or worldview. But here, the movie actually focuses on the themes and the story and the message it wants to send, instead of just loading the whole thing with dumb, like, man-bad jokes. These 3 guys are not man-bad stereotypes, and if you seriously think that
Speaks her mind?
is a serious attempt to demean and patronize men, I think you're taking this a bit too seriously, much like Mulan 2020. Wow, this movie does not know what the film it was based on was trying to do. It's genuinely incredible. Remember that empowering story about a woman who was able to defy the odds? Well, it turns out she was only able to do that because she's the first and only female ever to have this magical force called Chi, which allows her to become a superhero and kick arrows at people. This is just so backwards and so opposite to what the original Mulan was saying. What makes this message so great is that Mulan is just a normal woman. She can't live up to the singular expectation that society has decided that she has to live up to, and because of that, she's basically deemed essentially worthless. But she isn't, and we learn that she isn't. She may not be a tea pouring expert, and she may not be able to bench 500 pounds, but she has so much about her that's special that allows her to excel. That's why the arrow scene is so satisfying. She wasn't able to do this impossible task because she has the highest level of midichlorians anyone has ever seen. She did it because she believed in herself, and since she's just a normal woman, it then follows that any other woman can do this too. And when all of China bows down before her, it lets the entire audience know, you see this female character we followed for the last 90 minutes? That could be you. Honor isn't about fitting into a box someone else has decided for you. It's about finding your own box in a way and allowing it to take whatever shape and size you want it to. If this woman did something so dishonorable, then how was she able to do something this incredible that most people could only dream of? Maybe the idea of honor, the way we're thinking about it, is just a little bit flawed. I like the villain, even though he doesn't really do anything, but that's fine because he's really more of a plot device than anything. I feel like Disney might have gotten the Huns confused with the Mongols, but I don't know. I like Li Shang, I like the 3 guys, like I said before. Mushu really doesn't clash with the tone as much as you would think, and every song portrays what it's trying to show so well. You would think that the movie in 3rd place I'd be more passionate and excited about discussing, but the truth is, I'm really not very passionate about this movie at all. It's just perfect. The pacing, the animation, the characters, the soundtrack, the message, all of it. Like I said, I might be the only person who would put this movie so high, but to me, it's just such an amazing story, so beautifully and entertainingly told, that you could ask me to watch it for a 6th time any day of the week, and I would not hesitate for a second. And yes, I'm sure the depictions of Chinese culture are very bad. I just don't watch this movie to try to learn about Chinese culture. If you are doing that, maybe stop. It's not going to work. If you don't like this movie because 95% of what they say about China is probably wrong, that's totally valid. But I just watched this for the story, which is pretty progressive in nature anyways. And as a story, I happen to think it's very amazing. Okay, just wanted to add that in. On to number 2 now. The Prince of Egypt is absolutely magnificent, and if I didn't have a years-long personal connection with the #1 movie, it would be higher than 2nd place. There is no short version of my thoughts on this movie. The review I did last July is one of the reviews I'm most proud of, and I genuinely have exhausted every single thing I could possibly say about this movie. It is simply perfect. It's a religious story that doesn't feel preachy in the slightest and instead focuses on the deeply human emotions at the core of the story. If you had told me last year that DreamWorks made a movie version of the Book of Exodus and that it's one of the best films ever made, I straight up wouldn't have believed you, but now I am that person telling you guys that this is one of the best films ever made. Every background is beautiful and every shot is framed perfectly. This movie does something very cool where it knows that it's awesome and it gives us these moments, capitalized, that are only there to make us cower before the sheer majesty of this movie. The Angel of Death scene has no words. The parting of the Red Sea has no words. Moses realizing that his family is responsible for mass genocide has no words. It's just visuals and music, or lack of music in some cases, and it's always amazing. They do this very often, and I'm very glad. Hell, the entire opening song, Deliver Us, is basically one giant moment capitalized, which is why it's objectively, yes, objectively, the best opening song to any musical ever made. I firmly believe this. And all of the other songs are almost equally good, and that's crazy. Through Heaven's Eyes is beautiful, the Plague song is haunting, Deliver Us, top 5 song, yes I already mentioned this song, I'm mentioning it again. I could keep going for as long as the movie is long. Pick any scene, and I'll say, ooh, that's a good scene, one of the best scenes in the movie. Ooh, that's a good scene, one of the best scenes in the movie. Ooh, that's a good scene, one of the best scenes in the movie. Every scene in The Prince of Egypt is my favorite scene. Every song is my favorite song, except Deliver Us, which is even better than that. Every moment capitalized is my favorite moment capitalized. The plain and simple reason why this movie is so high is because it just does everything that much better than every other movie on this list has done everything. I imagine that most of you have watched this movie, but if you haven't, well, this far up the list, you already know what I'm about to say. Watch The Prince of Egypt. It very well might be the magnum opus of animation, if it weren't for one other film. Beauty and the Beast is the best animated movie from the 20th century. It's also the best animated movie. It's also the best movie. There is no other film in existence that I have watched as much as this. There is no other film in existence that I can quote as much as this. There is no other film in existence that I can connect to and resonate with as much as this. To put it simply, there is no other film in existence that I love as much as this. Pretty much everyone agrees that this movie is at least a 9 out of 10, but combined with the early age that I discovered this movie and the role it played in my childhood, that number for me catapulted up to a 20. I had 90 minutes before preschool started, watch Beauty and the Beast. I had nothing to do on a long car ride, watch Beauty and the Beast. I was bored at some family function that I was too young to participate in, boom. Beauty and the Beast. This has been my go-to movie to make me feel better for my entire life. Every emotional beat lands for me in such a deep part of my heart that I can't even explain it. I have some sort of deep foundational memory with literally every scene, all the way down to the stupid bonus ones. And if I have one regret on my deathbed, it will be, without a doubt, that I did not watch Beauty and the Beast one more time. The story is incredible, and it is absolutely not about Stockholm Syndrome. It's the same thing as saying that Ariel wanted to go to the surface for a man. Like, did you even watch the movie? Did you miss the part where Belle left the castle because she couldn't stand living with the Beast? She didn't go back because she was just so in love. She went back to save him because that's just who she is, a good person. And that inspires the Beast to be better. She doesn't change for him, and he doesn't even change for her. He changes because of her, Everything between the scene where Belle flees the castle and the tale as old as time scene is some of the best Disney that Disney has ever put out. Seeing Belle and the Beast slowly grow closer together as he realizes that he wants to be better and she realizes that he is being better is just so incredible. And to cement the Beast's arc, when he realizes that the best thing for Belle is to let her go, that's exactly what he does, even though it's practically torture for him, because as Mrs. Potts says, he loves her. And love isn't just about liking each other's company, or feeding the birds together, or seeing the smile on someone's face after you give them an entire library. It's ultimately about valuing another person as much as you value yourself, balancing each other out, supplementing one another, and wanting them to be happy, even if you know that it would detract from your own happiness. And at the end, the Beast does the ultimate version of this, essentially sacrificing himself to save her. Belle realizes that she loves him, and the curse is broken. He has redeemed himself. This is the core of why I love this movie. The Beast is probably more of a main character than Belle. He starts as evil and mysterious, but through his discussions with his servants, we quickly realize that there's more to him than that, and that he does actually have some humanity, even if it's buried beneath his negative traits. But in this scene where Belle and the Beast are bickering and they finally exchange some actual nice words, all of a sudden the whole dynamic between the two characters completely flips, and now we're just really rooting for the Beast to improve himself, and we can't help but smile every time he does something to try to make Belle happy. We feel his pain when he realizes that what would really make Belle truly happy is letting her go. We feel his depression afterward, and most of all, when he finally fights back against Gaston, it creates the most audience stands up and claps in the movie theater moment in any Disney movie. It's just such an amazing character arc. The songs only add to this. Every single song in this movie is among the most famous that Disney has ever made. Be Our Guest, Gaston, Tale as Old as Time, the Mob Song. The movie literally starts with a giant 5-minute song that's literally just Howard Ashman flexing his ability to make anything he did sound perfect. Even the instrumentals are incredible. What other Disney movie has this much incredible background music? Every side character is classic. Gaston is one of Disney's most threatening villains. The animation is some of the most beautiful in not just the Disney Renaissance, but all of Disney. And the direction of every scene is absolutely perfect, always conveying exactly the feeling that was intended. I honestly could make an entire video just on this movie, and I've barely even scratched the surface of all of the things I love about it. But I have to stop at some point, and to tell you the truth, I'm quite tired of working on this video, so I'll end it with this. A very, very preliminary version of Beauty and the Beast premiered at the New York Film Festival in September 1991. About a third of it was still pencil sketches, and at the end, it got a 10-minute standing ovation. Beauty and the Beast is the most perfect movie I've ever watched, but to me, it's even more than that. This movie represents a time in my life when I didn't know anything about how much the world kind of sucks sometimes. A time when my biggest worry was what toy I would be playing with after I got back from preschool. A time when I lived in a different house, in a different part of town, and I went to a different school, and I didn't know any of my current friends, and I wasn't worrying about college, and I didn't have homework to toil over, and I didn't have a job to report to at scheduled times every week, and I wasn't always trying to make myself edit even a mere 60 seconds of my next video whenever I couldn't find any motivation, because if I didn't, people would be disappointed. I'm quite happy with my life now, but the future is uncertain, always will be, for everyone, and that's stressful, that sucks, you know that, but Beauty and the Beast takes me out of all that, into a time when everything was okay, and it seemed like it always would be. When I watch this movie, I feel safe. I feel like a kid again. It helps that it's essentially perfect anyway, but when combined with everything else, I mean, come on. The top of this list was never going to be any other way. Beauty and the Beast is the best animated movie of the 20th century, and one of the biggest things that inspired me to watch all of the others in the first place.